Chapter 143 Heavyweight news. Wei Sheng's clothing was ripped, his entire body covered in countless little sword cuts, and he appeared to be out of energy. If the judges hadn't seen that he was still stubbornly persisting, they would have stepped in a long time ago. Gu Rongping's expression was peaceful, the darkness and viciousness on his face had disappeared long ago. He could be favored by so many to win, and had never lost until now. How could he be unable to see his own situation? When he realized he had made a mistake and started to adjust himself, Wei Sheng was instantly placed at a disadvantage. Heart Lake Sword, heart like a lake, undisturbed. Wei Sheng struggled to keep going. If it wasn't that he had a more profound knowledge of sword essence, and could dodge or stop Gu Rongping at the last possible second, he would have lost already. Even so, he still could not stop Gu Rongping from attacking. Gu Rongping had changed from the previous impatience to a relaxed ease as his advantage was slowly increased. The sword scriptures were different, and the roads they walked would be drastically different. Some sword scriptures were forceful and explosive, what they needed was each attack to be like a thunderbolt, without keeping anything back. Some sword scriptures walked the path of entanglement. They did not pursue killing with one attack. They went for continuously accumulating an advantage like pulling silk off a cocoon, to exhaust the opponent and in the end leave them with no energy to attack. Gu Rongping was so. Gu Rongping truly isn't bad. Heart Lake Sword, is very advanced for such a young age. Bao Rong hadn't reached this level when he was his age. Tian Songzi couldn't help but praise. After a slight pause, he couldn't help but keep praising, this Wei Sheng is even better. Ningmai stage and he could cultivate to heart-turn sword essence, even more rare is that his personality is resilient and strong. Even though he is clearly trapped, he still does not submit. This boy will be great in the future. Yes. I'm afraid that Dong Fu's sects will have to eat behind Wukong's sword sect in the future. Ling Ying sect's leader Feng Qing glanced at Tian Songzi. These words were what many of Dong Fu's little sects were thinking. Many people did not have good expressions. Tian Songzi knew it, but didn't state it, only faintly saying, the strongest rule, the power naturally determines the benefits. Or does sect leader Feng believe Wukong's sword sect does not have the power? Feng Qing choked but he defended himself, I'm afraid that Wukong's sword sect will have too big of an appetite. Dislike rose in Tian Songzi's heart. He turned to look at the surrounding people, and said, Wukong's sword sect has been keeping a low profile all these years. If they were truly greedy people, with Ice Dragon's sword strength, there would not be many in Dong Fu that could stop him, much less sect leader Pei and the others who are also Jin Dan. These words instantly made many people relax greatly. They found it was true when they thought about it. If Wukong's sword sect were really those kind of people, did they even have the power to resist? Wukong's sword sect is a part of Dong Fu. Wukong's sword sect is strong, our Dong Fu is strong. Dong Fu is strong, everyone here will naturally benefit. Tian Songzi said meaningfully. Right. I see that sect leader Pei and the others are not those that would steal from others. If our Dong Fu can take a step up among the 13 primary towns, that's beneficial for everyone. Someone praised. The others all agreed. No one could rival Tian Songzi's influence in Dong Fu. Over all these years, he was mostly fair in his conduct, and everyone trusted him. The Ling Ying sect leader was on the side, his expression changing. Tian Songzi suddenly stood up. Everyone knew that he had something to say. The surrounding instantly feel silent. There are many people that do not know my initial motivation for holding this sword test conference. Tian Songzi started slowly. His voice was not loud, but there was an extra hint of solemnity. Everyone could help but perk their ears to listen. Those that were clever already realized that the matter was not simple. Maybe some people know, but it's possible some people do not know. Tian Songzi paused slightly, before continuing, Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia is showing signs of instability. First, it was silent, then it was a ruckus. No way. How is it possible? Weren't there many experts holding the fort in bloody sky metropolis Jie? The panicked voices flowed. These light words were like lightning on a clear day, instantly shaking up all the sect leaders. Even Linging sect's leader was struck dumb. Gradually, fear started to show on his face. Bloody sky metropolis Jie was the buffer between Xiuzha and Yaoma. That was the paradise where countless Xiuzha hunted Yao. As long as you had the power, you could receive anything you wanted. Jingshi, talismans, rare materials. Expert after expert became famous there. It was the backyard of the Xiuzha, the material store of the Xiuzha. So when Tian Songzi said bloody sky metropolis Jia was showing signs of instability, they hadn't managed to react to the connection between the sword test conference and bloody sky metropolis Jia, had not reacted to the implications behind this news. Only when people remembered how bloody sky metropolis Jia had formed did they suddenly wake. Even the most composed person had a changed expression. Is the news confirmed? The market didn't have any news at all. Terror quickly spread across the people. They were only asking out of reflex. Everyone knew if Tian Songzi could say this publicly, the news definitely would not be fake. Tian Songzi had more avenues of information than they did. Tian Songzi lightly sighed. Everyone, please prepare. This time, the first 100 local Xiuzha, I will open the secret realm for them. This was another heavyweight news. Secret realm. A secret realm was like an extremely small Jie. No one knew how a secret realm formed, but each Jie would have secret worlds. But how many there were, it was unable to be predicted. Secret realms were all different, but there were similarities. In every secret realm, the Ling energy inside would be plentiful, and it would be extremely beneficial to cultivate inside. Inside the secret realm, due to the high density of Ling energy, and the lack of people, there would be large numbers of rare Ling grasses and beasts. And in some secret realms, there would also be residences left behind by ancient Xiuzha. No one would have thought that Dongfu Hall would have a secret realm. As expected of the true master of Dongfu. The wealth he possessed was truly unimaginable. This secret realm had been discovered by my ancestral founder. However, it is a pity that Xiuzha above Jindan cannot enter, so this secret realm has been unopened until now. Since a great calamity is approaching, the disciples of all sects, as long as they enter the top 100, they can enter this secret realm. But as to what they can obtain, that will be up to their good fortune. Tian Songzi said. A small smile finally came onto the fearful faces of those large sect leaders. If they were talking about disciples from the top 10, then Dongfu might not have many, but the top 100, the core disciples of most of the Dongfu sects were basically all in there. Elders' efforts. We really are shamed. A sect leader suddenly came out and bowed deeply to Tian Songzi. The other sect leaders also came out and bowed in thanks to Tian Songzi. To open one's secret realm and allow disciples from other sects to enter, such a matter, it had never been heard of before. Tian Songzi's breadth of mind received everyone's admiration. Even Linging sect leader Feng Qing did not hesitate in bowing. There was no joy on Tian Songzi's face. He sighed, the fire of succession. Only when there is fire can it be passed on. Everyone's heart started to fall. From Tian Songzi's words, they finally realized that the situation was far worse than they had imagined. Zhong Ming Yen saw those nimble rings of light but still unhesitatingly stepped into the formation. Once he stepped in, the scenery around him instantly changed. Limitless blue-green mist covered the empty wilderness. He was in the middle of the wilderness, his surroundings empty. In the sky above his head, light rings of various sizes swam like schools of fish. In the faint blue-green mist that was like what occurred during sunrise, the chimes from the collisions became even more ethereal. Those mischievous and nimble rings of light danced high above his head, and even higher up, a crescent moon hung, its faint shine falling on this patch of wilderness, giving even the mist a blurry shine. This was a formation that a Zhuji could set up. Zhong Ming Yen was slightly surprised and had to reconsider Zuemo. He may have little knowledge of formations, but he had received Swa Mei Tian's attentive teachings, and a half-assed outer sect disciple like Swa Mo could not compare. Even though he was not clear what formation Swa Mo had set up, but he could clearly understand the meaning contained in the formation in front of his eyes. He decided to put away the disdain in his heart. This Swa Mo could be considered a genius in formations. Zhong Ming Yan casually walked, strong confidence revealed in his expression. So what if the other was a formations genius? He did not have any fear in his heart. Quite the opposite. He, who had thought he had picked a bland opponent, started to feel anticipation. Zhong Ming Yan's desire for battle increased even more. Gently shaking his wrist, the plum branch in his hand sliced and made a circle. A plum blossom gently trembled and fell of the plum branch, floating into the sky. One cut plum. This plum flower silently shattered in the air, turning into a pink ball of light. The light seemed to be pulled by two invisible hands in opposite directions, quickly pulled long and thin. A circle of faint sword essence, with the pink ball of light as the center, suddenly spread out towards the surroundings. The long and pink sword essence had no warmth or gentleness. Quite the opposite. When it truly became a sword energy, the harsh and sharp sword essence reached a peak. Zhong Ming Yan narrowed his eyes, and his expression just like that pink sword energy became sharp and menacing. The energy being disrupted, the dancing rings of light in the air were like startled schools of fish. The chimes of collisions were like rain. Go! Zhong Ming Yan shouted, the plum branch in his hand leading. The long and narrow pink sword energy suddenly brightened, drawing a bright pink light in the air as it headed into the rings of light. The sword energy was extremely sharp. The rings of light were like bubbles, popping upon a single touch. The fragments of light rained down like snowflakes. Under the bright moonlight, inside the blue-green mist, the dots of broken light flushed away the killing intent carried by the sword essence, and added a hint of poignancy. Hiss! Swa Mo couldn't help but inhale sharply. This Zhong Ming Yan's power wasn't on the same level as that Chaoan he had encountered before. The power in that one blow was enough to frighten his little heart to beat rapidly. If before, he had some thoughts about attacking first, Zhong Ming Yan's sword strike instantly made him understand how unrealistic his thoughts were. The only method he had now was defense. This was the only thing he could do. If Zhong Ming Yan found his position, Swa Mo was sure that, with his half-learned sword essence, he would lose within 3 blows. After making a decision, the last stray thought in Swa Mo's mind was erased. His hands became even faster. Fast. Faster. Chapter 144, Strange. Zhong Ming Yan quickly frowned. Those rings of light had appeared extremely weak, like bubbles that popped upon contact, but there really were too many of them. His sword essence had, without him detecting it, had much of its momentum lost and its strength had been worn down by half. However, the rings of light in the sky did not seem to decrease in number. Even more, he still had not found Swa Mo. His eyes looked in the surroundings and didn't find any shadow of Swa Mo. He knew that, in a formation, one should not believe what the eyes showed. His consciousness had also swept through the surroundings, but it would always encounter strange interference that prevented him from detecting Swa Mo. All of this indicated that the formation Swa Mo had constructed was not normal. Zhong Ming Yan did not panic, however. Everyone always saw him brimming with murderous intent and assumed that he wanted to find Swa Mo to immediately to defeat him. In reality, it was not so. He enjoyed battle and enjoyed the pleasure of being challenged. The stronger Swa Mo was, the more his desire for battle rose. He planned on destroying Swa Mo's entire formation. What would be more pleasurable than destroying the other's strongest defense from the ground up? This made Zhong Ming Yan's blood boil. The noise when Skyring Moon Chime formation had been activated had truly been scary. Not just the audience in Dongfu, but even the other Xiuzha in the Great Pine Pavilion had been shocked by the sudden light. Many Xiuzha were curious, but they still didn't dare to walk around freely, all staying in their original places. As for the powerful Shouja, they did not have any hesitations about running towards the source of the light. Su pushed her movement speed to the maximum. To stop other Shouja from ambushing her along the way, she released the Ling power in her body spread out without anything holding back. The Black Day's sword under her feet released a powerful magnetism. Different from the howling flight of other flying swords, the flight of the Black Day's sword was more like gliding. But due to its terrifying speed, it howled as it broke through the air. She did not conceal herself as she raced towards the source of the light. That cowardly guy that ate soft rice actually did not send out the paper crane. In flight, Su couldn't help but furrow her brows. She held extreme dislike for Zuomo's conduct. He clearly knew his strength was not enough but still acted on his own. It was very easy for his companions to dislike him. Even though Su did not think of Zuomo as her companion, but she needed Zuomo's help to forge her flying sword. This meant that she could not disregard Zuomo's safety. If Zuomo could not enter the top 10, then no matter how high of a rank she achieved, it would be useless. She disliked people who increased the difficulty of things she had to do. Only this once. After this affair ended, she never wanted to see this dislikable guy again. Suddenly, she thought of what Lin Qian Shixiang said to her, and her heart became even more irritated. Chang Heng still casually strolled, but the light released by the sky-ring moon chime formation was peerlessly bright, far surpassing the light of any sword energy. That's an interesting guy, he said to himself, before leaping into the air. Carrying a patch of bloody light, he disappeared. At a hill, a figure suddenly disappeared, and then suddenly appeared not far away, before disappearing, and then appearing even further away. Because of the speed of movement, before the afterimage at the previous place had vanished, he would appear at the next position. Where he passed, he left behind a string of shadows, extremely strange. Gue Feng was using his ghost movement to run. In the blink of an eye, he was far away, his speed not much slower than a flying sword. But that direction. The Shouja along the way gaped as they stretched their necks to look in the direction that Gue Feng disappeared in. It was the place that was flashing with light. Luo Li had thought of being a hunter waiting for his prey, but he was slightly shocked by the light that had suddenly rose on the horizon. That scene. It definitely wasn't something caused by a sword energy or something like it. Truthfully, a person that could create self-separation, there wouldn't be any problems with his intelligence. He quickly knew what it was. Formations. Only formations. He instantly was speechless. Of all the Shouja that attended the last round of the sword test conference, only one person would lose the face of sword Xiao to make formations. There was only Zuomo, such a person that does not endear himself to others. Luo Li said helplessly to himself. Grabbing the flying sword, he stood up. He had spent the longest with the sect leader and the others, and knew their thoughts better. Maybe he should go and kick the other out of the competition, to spare him from further humiliation. He wasn't certain about the sect leader, but he believed the other Shifu definitely would not oppose it. In reality, curiosity dominated Luo Li's heart. That fight with Zuomo had been the most important turning point in his life. At the beginning, he had been slightly angry and hateful, but gradually, as Luo Li reflected on himself, his hate towards Zuomo had disappeared without a trace. If not for Zuomo, he was afraid that he would still be living his days out muddle-headedly like before. That would be terrible. But he definitely didn't have any thoughts of thanking Zuomo. He was naturally curious. When Zuomo had fought with him, the difference in cultivation between them had been great, but in the end, Zuomo had won. He had seen Zuomo's fight in the sword test conference. The difference in cultivation between Zuomo and his opponent had been even greater, but Zuomo had won again. All those dazzling tricks that Zuomo had showed had greatly expanded his vision, but he couldn't help but find it pitiful. He really couldn't understand, with Zuomo's great talent in the sword, why would he not cultivate the sword, and rather learn all those middling things? In the time that he had created self-separation, his comprehension of the sword was much deeper than before, and his eyes were naturally better. With one look, he had seen that while Zuemo had many tricks up his sleeve that made people gasp in awe, but it was a great obstacle for him in his future cultivation of the sword. Heterogeneity was the greatest taboo of sword show. But Luo Li was still curious. Even though he was shaking his head inside, but he was still curious what Zuemo would do. This guy was extremely cunning and slippery, with an endless bag of creative tricks. Adding on that he was an extremely treacherous person, and if he could ambush someone twice, he definitely wouldn't do it only once. This sword test conference, there were many experts. The difference between Zuemo and them was even greater. He might not understand Zuemo very well, but he felt that Zuemo was not someone that would easily surrender. If he didn't cause some trouble, he probably wouldn't surrender. Would not easily surrender, had many tricks, and some power. This kind of weirdo, how could people not have a little bit of anticipation? It would be good to see. Luo Li spoke to himself as he stepped on the flying sword and left the mountain valley. Changheng was the first person to appear outside the formation. Right after, Su and Gue Feng almost appeared at the same time. The appearance of three experts caused the Shouja that had been hiding in the dark to feel as though his heart had jumped out of his chest. These three, none of them were easy to deal with them. Luo Li quickly appeared not far away. Facing the three experts, he was extremely calm. Without a word, he sat down cross-legged on the ground, his flying sword floating in front of him. Changheng turned with slight shock to look at Luo Li. Su and Gue Feng turned their faces at the same time to look at Luo Li. In their perception, the seated Luo Li was disappearing bit by bit. But they could clearly see him sitting there, not having moved at all. The three of them were slightly shocked. It seemed that every disciple of Wukong's sword sect had some skill. "I'm not fighting." Nan Menyang bellowed, and then took a step back. No matter who it was, realizing that there were strong opponents in the surroundings, would not be willing to use up all their power. Yu Bai did not say anything but backed up a step at the same time. He didn't want to fight either. With so many experts at the sidelines, if even one of them attempted an ambush, he wouldn't be able to deal with it. However, the attention of this group of people was not on them but on the formation. The two exchanged a look and, at the same time, turned to look at the formation, waiting to see the spectacle. Not long after, another person came to spectate. It was the yellow-faced man that Changheng had encountered previously. Occasionally other shouja would land outside the formation. Those that dared to come up to watch at this time were experts that had confidence in their power. Up until now, other than Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping that were still fighting heatedly on the main peak, basically all the experts had gathered here. Such a strange scene, not just the competitors but even the shouja watching the mirage in Dongfu were gaping. What was this? Everything in front of their eyes, no matter what direction they looked, carried a strange atmosphere. A formation with a moon hanging over it, and a crowd of people outside. All of them were experts, almost all of the top 10 from the rankings were present. It was like a gathering of experts. If they didn't have the power, they would be too embarrassed to come over. The battle between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping, which had been watched by the most people, quickly was abandoned by everyone. Everyone's turned to Zuomo's position. Strange. Too strange. If these experts didn't come from different sects and different places, some with stronger backgrounds than Dongfu Hall, they would definitely be suspicious that someone was manipulating the competition from the shadow. But right now, all of them were performing the same action, stretching their necks out, looking into the formation projected by the mirage. It was like there was an astonishing beauty hiding in the formation, and she was completely naked. Pei Yuan ran and the others were also gaping. Behind them, the crowd of Wukong's sword sect disciples were dumbstruck. What are they doing? Yen Lu stammered out. Pei Yuan Ran's lips trembled, but he didn't know what to say. He looked dumbly at the scene and couldn't say anything. Xin Yen, who was usually stoic and wooden, had his mouth wide open, his eyes bulging. Shi Feng Rong was covering her mouth, her eyes widened greatly, not noticing how strange it was that she was maintaining this position. They want to watch. Yan Le hesitantly stammered out, "To watch, they aren't fighting." Pei Yuanran felt blood rise to his throat, his vision turning black and almost fainted. When he raised his head again, his face was bright red. Heavens! Ancestral Masters! Forgive this disciple. If before, he had only been regretting his action of making Zhou Mo attend the last round of the sword test conference, right now, he wanted to smash his head against the wall and kill himself. Yan Li's words swirled in his head. To watch, they wouldn't fight. Chapter 145, Nan Men Yang. A real man. Different from the outside, Chang Heng and the others could clearly see every move that Zhong Ming Yan made inside the formation. However, Zhou Mo was still hidden away. Zhong Ming Yan's one-cut plum brightened many people's eyes. In reality, Zhong Ming Yan did not feel well. It was like his punch had landed in soft cotton, his power undetectably being dissipated. He couldn't help but frown. It was not because he felt it was difficult, but out of dislike. He disliked this kind of soft attack very much. Most sword shio did not like fighting with warm and soft enemies. If they did not kill off the other in one attack, then what awaited them was endless trouble. Such enemies usually had great defenses. It was extremely hard to get them in one attack. As the battle progressed, it would become a labor of endurance. The endurance of most sword shio definitely was not good. He hadn't thought that this Zhou Mo would also be this way. Zhong Ming Yan started to rub his forehead. Zhou Mo had been frightened by Zhong Ming Yan's sword strike, his little hands shaking as they were setting up the formation, almost ruining it. Don't think that he was familiar with Sky Ring Moonchime formation, he was only familiar with the theory. The amount wasted by the enormous formation was astounding. Normally, he didn't have that much Jingshi to waste. Luckily, the first sword energy had been blocked. The replenishing rings of light didn't look as though they were damaged. Zhou Mo's heart landed slightly. He had just started studying Sky Ring Moonchime formation. How to set it up, what materials it needed, it was more than enough for him. As to the different variations, he was not familiar with them. There was no way around it, there was not enough time. From the time that the sect leader had notified him about attending the last round of the sword test conference until now, he had used almost all his time on this, and had just barely understood how to set it up. Even more so, what he was setting up this time was a 72-child formation, Sky Ring Moonchime formation. For that Kunluan introductory formation Jade Scroll, he had gone all in. Even though he was greatly rushed, but he still tried his best, his hands fleetingly fast. The great pressure did not make him panic. Quite the opposite, it was like he was shot with chicken blood, his entire body was abnormally exuberant. His consciousness was completely spread out, his attention focused like it never had been before, the uncompleted formation and the components appeared so clear in front of his eyes. Because he had practiced finger movements for so long, his 10 fingers were extremely nimble. Vajra Profound Sutra had been in effect, and his physical strength far surpassed most sword shio, and he could easily lift up the large pieces of material. His consciousness was even more terrifying, covering the entire formation. Any change would be unable to escape his consciousness. He was a blurry shadow, furiously setting down formations. Countless materials flowed like water from his hands, accurately thrown to the positions needed. His fingers were like fresh flowers blooming, after images flickering as ripple after ripple of Ling force was sent from his constantly moving fingers into the formation. With the aid of the formation's power, Zhou Mo hid himself so no one else could see him. No one knew where Zhou Mo was. Everyone had assumed that Zhou Mo was hiding in a certain place, waiting for an opportunity to give Zhong Ming Yan a killing blow at the most dangerous time. No one knew that the enormous formation in front of them was an incomplete formation. Raising his head to look at the crescent moon in the sky, Zhong Ming Yan's fretful heart calmed. He was proud, but he was not dumb. To be able to stand out from so many other disciples, who would be dumb? Those rings of light definitely were not the crux to breaking the formation, he thought. He stood in his spot, the light rings in the air were like free fish, not attacking him. Was it that crescent moon? The bright moon over his head seemed far yet real, not appearing at all like something created by the formation. Truthfully, it wasn't just the bright moon. Everything inside this formation was no different than really. But he knew that everything he saw were all created by the formation, they were all fake. There was no formation in the world that could not be solved, just like there was no invincible sword show in this world. Any formation would have a cover door. The so-called cover door referred to the Achilles heel of the formation, and the crux to solving a formation. Where was the cover door of this formation? The light in Zhong Ming Yan's eyes flashed. He stood like that in his spot and started to think. Yu Bai, who had just stopped fighting, felt someone come close and turned to look. He saw his previous opponent, Nan Men Yang, come over with his exaggerated sword. He couldn't help but be on his guard. What's he doing? Nan Men Yang bellowed, a face full of curiosity. His voice was like thunder. Even though he had pushed it extremely low, everyone could hear him. Yu Bai first stilled, but seeming that Nan Men Yang's expression did not seem like he was joking, he suddenly remembered that Nan Men Yan had no family or sect. Then he understood. Sword Shio with no family nor sect could not compete at understanding all of the fundamentals with seedlings, like Yu Bai, that had been nurtured from childhood. Yu Bai noticed that other people's eyes had wandered over to him. Composure. Master said, I need to be warm and respectful. Gently coughing, Yu Bai warmly explained, Zhong Ming Yan is thinking of a way to solve it, that needs thinking. Nan Men Yang stared with his bell-sized eyes, unconsciously raising his voice as he examined Yu Bai, just chop him down. And says you guys, you are so womanishly fussy. If it was Nan Men Yang's usual voice was loud enough. This was like thunder roaring, so loud that Yu Bai's ears rang. The tendons in Yu Bai's forehead jumped slightly. He hadn't thought that this guy would be so chatty. It was unknown who laughed first. The tendons in Yu Bai's forehead started to pulse again. Composure. He forced out a smile. This formation is extremely difficult, it would be hard to solve. Nan Men Yang once again interrupted Yu Bai, looking at him in puzzlement, his eyes widening again. What solve, just cut it down. But that guy's body, tisk, more petite and supple than my lover, about the same as you. If it was the more Nan Men Yang talked, the more excited he got. His right hand in a fist, he tore apart his clothing, furiously beating his masculine chest that was as hard as metal, breathing heavily through his nose like a gorilla. Petite and supple. Yu Bai's handsome face instantly twisted, the Ling power in his body almost running out of control like a tsunami that could erupt at any time. Composure. Nan Men Yang did not detect it. He was like a furious bull, staring at the formation, wanting to try it out, but his mouth did not stop for a second. Look at what swords you guys are using, they are thin like chopsticks, are they even usable? A man should use a sword like this. He raised the door-sized sword in his hand, and waved it, and proudly said, don't understand? I'm telling you this in confidence. Anne's lover told Anne, need big. Need big. Need bigger. A real man uses a big sword. He suddenly closed his mouth, hesitating for a moment before lowering his voice to ask suspiciously, are you really a man? Flash, everyone's eyes moved to Yu Bai. Having reached the limits of his tolerance, Yu Bai finally could not bear it any longer. His face was as black as ink, his handsome features twisted, screw composure. The flying sword in his hand pointed straight at Nan Men Yang, angrily shouting, shut up. Let's fight. Nan Men Yang paused and then furiously shook his large head. I only fight with men. Disregarding Yu Bai completely, he raised his large sword, pointed it at the formation and excitedly hollered, An's going to chop the formation. An has never chopped something like this. Haha, take a good look at An. Real men will chop the formation. Finishing, with his enormous sword held up high, in big strides, he charged at the formation like a bull. Yu Bai was enraged, and completely lost his mind. He shrieked, stop. You're mine. He turned into a white flash, chasing Nan Men Yang and headed into the big formation. Sue had been laughing on the inside hearing Nan Men Yang's sinister words, but this sudden change shocked her so much she couldn't stop them in time. Damn it! There were now 3 people in the formation. Zhuo definitely wouldn't be able to deal with it. Thinking about this, she panicked, stomped her foot and charged into the Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, with the Black Day's sword. Gue Feng saw Su rush into the formation, a cold light flashed through his eyes before he also disappeared. The heart of the yellow-faced man also moved, and he unhesitatingly charged into the formation. Chang Heng said to himself, interesting. Finishing, he headed to the formation, but compared to the others, he walked calmly. Luo Li stood, and brushed off the non-existent dust on his clothes. He said helplessly, why am I in the same sect as this guy? As he spoke, he started walking towards the formation. The other Xiuzhe hesitated a while. Right after, there were people continuously charging into the formation. The Xiuzhe that charged in were all very excited, aching for battle. They were all Xiuzhe that did not fear the competition. Almost all the experts in the sword test conference were now inside the formation. It was a rare chance to be able to compete with these experts. Such a great gathering, if they missed it, it would be the regret of a lifetime. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Figure after figure charged into the formation. A formation brimming with blue-green mist under a crescent moon was like a gigantic whirlpool, continuously sucking the surrounding Xiuzhe inside. Everyone that was watching the competition in Dongfu was dumbstruck. Even though they could see clearly from the mirage, but the sounds were not passed on. The people on the outside didn't know what happened. What was occurring in front of their eyes far surpassed their imagination. The experienced Tian Songzi was also gaping, why is Bayer so excited? What happened? He had never seen Yu Bai so excited. In his memories, his beloved disciple was forever warm and elegant, respectful and polite. What was this? No one was able to tell him. All those that charged into the formation were experts, the best and most exceptional disciples of the sects in Sky Moon Jia, the greatest among the younger generation. They all had great potential, they carried the hopes of each sect, what they learned were the best teachings in Sky Moon Jia, and what they used were the best talismans and flying sword. They seemed to be crazy at the moment, furious desire for battle on each person's face. Their eyes, as they looked at the formation, were filled with yearning. That formation, just how seductive was it? No matter if it was those floating in the air, or on the ground, time seemed to stop at this moment. The Xiuzhe, regardless of their cultivation, they were gaping, their expressions dumb, limbs motionless, not making a sound as though they were statues. At this moment, Dongfu was so quiet that it was possible to hear a needle land on the ground. Chapter 146, Zhuo Mo's sorrowful indignation. Yan Li's expression was extremely strange. He focused on business, and naturally could understand lip language. Those that also knew how to read lips were also like Yan Lu. They were stunned by Nan Men Yang's onslaught of words. The surroundings were too quiet, so quiet it was strange. Yan Lu tried to open his mouth a few times, but couldn't say a word. This strange silence was like a kind of pressure. No one spoke at this time. Pei Yuan Rant's mind was a mess. He had completely lost the ability to think. The strange scene in front of him was the straw that broke the camel's back. All of his intelligence, his experience, none of it was useful right now. His gaze was blank. Why did the sect have such a problematic person? Buzz buzz buzz. Like the sound of bees flapping their wings, the noise steadily grew, gathering into a flood, booming. Everyone felt their ears ring. In one instant, they could not hear anything. After a while, this wave of sound calmed and became peaceful. Shock, weirdness, amazement, all kinds of emotions were mixed together on the audience's faces. No one could keep their calm. This Nan Men Yang's mouth is stronger than flying swords. Yan Lu couldn't help but praise. That's right, he really was praising. His societal experience was extremely rich and knew just how effective a mouth was at many times. Shi Feng Rong hurriedly inquired. After Yan Lu finished narrating Nan Men Yang's words, the others were also dumbstruck. Who could have thought such a brute-looking man was able to say such dark and malicious words? Oh, maybe Nan Men Yang didn't do it on purpose. The only person that might not think that way would probably be Tian Songzi. Tian Songzi could imagine just how fiery the anger inside his beloved disciple was burning for him to lose his composure so. It was like he was experiencing it himself, killing intent on his old face. At this time, the surrounding sect leaders naturally wouldn't touch his sore spot. It wasn't all due to the inheritance that his ancestors left him that Tian Songzi was able to control Dong Fu for all these years. His own personal power was unfathomable. Very quickly, real men use big swords, quickly spread through the Xiuzha. Those Xiuzha that used big swords raised their heads and puffed their chests. However, most of the Xiuzha looked as though they didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They finally understood what had happened. The blankness in Pei Yuanran's eyes disappeared greatly. Everything had a limit. Sometimes, this limit would change, as the attribute of the matter changed. Like using formations. Before, Pei Yuanran felt it was embarrassing. However, when the formation that Zhua Mo laid down could cause such a big ruckus, and caught a crowd of experts, Pei Yuanran felt somewhat proud inside. Which other person's disciple could make such a ruckus with a formation? No matter if Zhua Mo's formation won or lost in the end, after this competition, maybe there would be people that would mock you by, but there definitely wouldn't be any mockery of Zhua Mo and his formation. They finally figured out what had happened, but the curiosity the people had did not decrease the slightest, and became even stronger. What was happening in the formation? So many experts gathered inside one formation, what changes would occur? How would they solve the formation? Everyone was filled with curiosity. At this time, Xiaoguo suddenly made a sound of surprise. Shixiang's formation seems to be getting bigger. Xiaoguo's words instantly caused other people's eyes to land on Zhua Mo's formation. Xian Yan suddenly said, yes, it is getting bigger. Shock came into the eyes of Pei Yuanran and the others, the disciples were puzzled. One here, and another one. Hurrying about setting up the formation, Zhua Mo was dumbstruck. What were these people doing? Were they crazy? He only paused for a little while and then was enraged. Just Zhong Ming Yan alone was enough to exhaust him. You guys are coming to add insult to injury. That's right, Zhua Mo instantly set down his opinion of the people's conduct, adding insult to injury. Even though he didn't understand what great grudge these people had against him, but it was clear that they were not coming to help him. Adding insult to injury was the most distasteful action. Zhua Mo gritted his teeth. At this time, he was not thinking about winning at all. So many experts entering the formation, to even think about winning was a delusion. Villains. You crowd of villains. Gu will destroy all of you. He seemed to see the Kunlun jade scroll reluctantly waving its hands to say goodbye to him, going further away from him. Zhua Mo was indignant and sorrowful. It was this indignation at his grievous losses that allowed Zhua Mo to quickly make a decision. He was going to give these people that were adding insult to injury a memorable lesson. Want to benefit from Ji'il ruin all your teeth. He didn't think about retreat. His eyes entirely red, he used the most poisonous and malicious words to curse this damned crowd of people. At the same time, his movements became even faster, all kinds of materials streaming from his hands like they didn't cost Jingshi. He felt that the blood in his body was burning, he was completely furious. Ah! The formation is still getting bigger. It really is increasing. Didn't you hear Nan Menyang say? Want big. Want big. Want bigger. If I'm Zhua Mo, I'd first leave, since everyone is trapped in there. Ha! Escape? Where would he escape? The moment he leaves the formation, he would just be waiting for death. Everyone outside is stronger than him. Without the protection of the formation, he would die even quicker. The sound of discussion rose. Everyone was puzzled by why Suomo's formation was getting bigger. But in all the versions, no one could guess what Suomo was planning. Was Suomo still delusional? No one would think that. There were too many experts in there. All the experts in the sword test conference were in there. Pitted against any competitors, Suomo would undoubtedly lose, much less the experts that were gathered together. Everyone just needed to make a move, and this large formation would undoubtedly collapse. Collapse? Suomo was very clear what the people in the formation thought. He smirked coldly inside, his hands not slowing down. Skyring Moon Chime Formation was a 4th grade formation. If there weren't some strong points, how would it have the qualification to be a 4th grade formation? Maybe they could break the formation, but it definitely wouldn't break in 1 or 2 moves. If they could not find the covered door of the formation, they didn't need to think about breaking or solving it using brute power alone. This covered door was not that easy to find. Suomo's actions were lightning fast. This caused the formation to quickly grow and was easily detected by the Shouja outside. But no one dared to go into the formation. The formation had now become the most dangerous area in the entire Great Pine Pavilion. After Su entered the formation, she felt her vision blur and she was situated in the wilderness. The cold moonlight fell down like water. She felt as though she was in a dream. Looking in the surroundings, everything was blurred. She didn't know where to start. That damned guy that ate soft rice. Why didn't he send out the paper crane yet? She was extremely panicked. She completely forgot that up until now, Suomo had not relied on her, and wasn't actually eating soft rice. After Nan Menyang charged into the formation, he sunk into a berserker rage. His Vajra scripture was at his maximum, his entire body covered in the golden light. Together with his tall and brawny figure, he was a god of battle. He gave a shout, and the mountain breaker sword viciously chopped. This sword chopped towards the rings of light in the sky. An extremely dense sword energy left the sword, howling as it rushed into the rings of light in the sky. The chimes were endless, like countless glass bottles were being broken. Gue Feng, who had just came in, saw this scene and jumped in shock. Such a forceful blow, if it was heading for him, no matter if he fended it or dodged, it would not be easy. Yet what surprised him was this blow that even he found difficult to defend was not effective in the slightest against the formation. It was like the fierce and sharp sword had broken the surface of the water. After the ripples passed, the surface of the water resumed normality. Gue Feng quickly found the weirdness. He had headed in immediately after Su, but he did not find Su's figure, encountering Nan Menyang instead. Did this formation have the ability to move others? His consciousness was also being disrupted by an invisible ripple and was ineffective in the formation. Gue Feng was in awe. Different from other people, he did not underestimate Suomo. He was skilled in underhanded and obscure skills, and did not walk the path of righteousness. Higher cultivation did not mean that one would definitely win. Seeing so many people enter the formation, but not having found the cover door, it was not an easy matter to leave. Then, where was the cover door? Like Nan Menyang, the first thing many Shouja did after they entered the formation was release attacks. However, to everyone's surprise, it was like their attacks had entered the sea, ineffective. Some powerful experts instantly stopped their futile efforts and started to think about the problem of solving the formation. Zhong Ming Yen hadn't expected so many people would charge into the formation at once. He couldn't help but frown. This group of people were really irritating. Like a swarm of flies. He hadn't solved the formation yet, but these people were coming in to also meddle. He was extremely displeased. Even though he still hadn't found the covered door of this formation, but Zhong Ming Yen did not believe that he could not harm a Zhuji disciple. But now that the situation was completely disrupted. This group of people had appeared out of nowhere, each of them seemingly insane, attacking in all directions as they came in. Suppressing the irritation inside, he smirked coldly as he put away the 7-plumb sword. You group of dumbasses. I'll watch to see what you guys can do. After having tried one blow, Zhongming Yan was certain that this formation was not as simple as imagined. He was extremely shocked inside. Such a formation, was it something a Zhuji Xiuzhe could set up? He didn't quite believe it, but the truth was right in front of his eyes, and he had personally tried. Maybe, it was a good thing these people have come to be cannon fodder. Zhongming Yan's eyes became even colder. Zuo was still buried in setting up formations. His speed was extremely quick. He had already reached the 63rd formation. In other words, there were only 9 child formations until he could complete the 72 child formation, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation. A Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, with 72 child formations. Humph humph, you guys can get a good taste. Already extremely tired, Zuo suddenly felt his body full of energy, his movements even faster, as he continued his expansion. He had great expectations for the 72 child formation, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation. Even he hadn't ever seen it before. What power would it have? There wasn't a better place to try it out than right now. At this time, a tragic howl could be heard from inside of the formation. Chapter 147, Born to Battle. A Xiuzhe had just tried to use a flying sword to attack the crescent moon hanging in the sky. Unexpectedly, this action seemed to enrage those harmless-looking rings of light. First, a light ring surrounded his body, then contracted. No one had expected a light ring that seemed to break with a touch could contain such great power. The sword Xiu instantly howled under the noose, his eyes flipping over, and fainted. Just as everyone was shocked, a black gold chain came down from the sky and accurately lassoed this unconscious Xiuzhe. Unconscious, judged loss, elimination from the competition. A cold voice sounded in everyone's ears and then it was quiet. Everyone knew it was the judges hidden in the shadows that had acted and saved this Xiuzhe. The judges that had been invited to the last round were all Jindan, and clearly were not average. They, naturally, could enter and leave the formation with ease, while the competitors were trapped by it. Other than shock, they also felt inspired. In terms of cultivation stages, there was only one stage between Ningmai and Jindan, but there was a vast difference in the power. For these Ningmai Xiuzhe, becoming Jindan was their dream, but they knew how difficult it was. Ningmai could be considered the backbone of Sky Moon Jia, and only becoming Jindan would mean you were considered an expert. Each year, countless people were blocked by this gate, but no one would retreat. If they passed this gate, that was really like carp jumping over the dragon gate, and soaring sky high. After that, there was also a long lifespan. Everyone wanted to live longer. But right now, they could only admire and be envious. They were young. Even though they had exceptional talent, their cultivation was shallow. In this 100 Xiuzhe, there was only a few that had reached the middle levels of Ningmai, and increases in cultivation were harder the further it went. Achieving Jindan before the age of 50 was an extremely difficult accomplishment. Zuo also heard the words of the judges, but at this time, he didn't have any thought of admiration. He almost started cursing. That judge had spoken without any warning, and frightened his hands into shaking, almost damaging the child formation he was setting up. Luckily, he forced Ling power in and managed to stabilize it. Everything inside the formation was under the cover of his consciousness. He naturally was clear that the Xiuzhe had been attacked. This was just the beginning. But he didn't relax his hands, he could not spare any attention. There were still 6 child formations before he could complete the 72, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, S. Once he completed the 72 child formations, not only would the formation become more powerful, but the formation would gain an additional ability, control. He had controlled formations before, but those were only simple formations. He had never controlled such a complex and large formation. The difference between a formation that was controlled by a person, and one that was not, was the distance between heaven and earth. Most importantly, if he could control such a big formation, it would be an extremely exhilarating experience. Inside the formation, those experts were not dumb, and had their own calculations. Su bolstered her Ling power, the magnetic force forming an extremely small magnetic shell around her to protect her. Lu Li continued to wait for prey. Even though his void realm was suppressed in the big formation to a smaller area, but he was still motionless as his mind quickly pondered how to increase the size of his void realm in this formation. These two both were planning to defend and counterattack, one was in action, and the other was silent. Su frantically moved through the formation. Where was the damned guy hiding? And Changheng, he idly wandered through the formation in curiosity. The yellow-faced man behaved similarly to him. Gui Feng's movements were hard to follow, suddenly appearing and disappearing. Only Nan Men Yang was still howling, each blow faster than the previous as he sliced at the rings of light. No one dared to come close to him. Seeing Nan Men Yang's masculine and brutal demeanor combined with his fanatical expression, anyone that went near him would most likely get chopped down as well. Yu Bai was like a gust of wind, face dark as he searched for Nan Men Yang's figure in the formation. It was strange. The formation was just a bit over 10 mu, but the people in the formation seemed to be in a vast wilderness. They could occasionally encounter another person, but the majority of the time, they could not. Compared to the ease of some of these shouja, the fighting between the other shouja in the formation was much more brutal. In the air above the big formation, the two judges idly talked, occasionally glancing at the formation. One of the judges was wearing a green Taoist robe, a cloth over his head, his name was Wu Ling Sanren. The other person was extremely imposing, wearing Ling armor. His name was Wei Fei, and one of the well-known experts in Sky Moon Jie. This Suemo is really to my taste. What he's planning is the 72-child formation, oh, he's pretty decisive. Wu Ling Sanren said, the setup of the formations might be very rough, but it still stuns me that he actually managed to finish this much, considering he's in Juji. Ha! Hearing this, Wei Fei teased, a pity that Pei Yuan ran and the others won't give this disciple to you. It is a pity. If he can learn from you for a few years, there probably wouldn't be anyone that could rival him in the younger generation in the field of formations. Wu Ling Sanren was one of those rare sword xiu that was skilled in formations, which was why Wei Fei said what he did. Wu Ling Sanren shook his head, such a talented disciple, which sect would not treasure him? Between his words, he was extremely depressed. He had long wanted a disciple suited to him, but never found one. The disciples he had now, they did work hard to cultivate the sword, but had no interest in formations. His skill in formations was Wu Ling Sanren's proudest skill. Now that no one would inherit these skills from him, how could he not be bothered? If Wukong's sword sect allowed Zuemo to enter his sect, he was willing to spend anything. But he also knew that was impossible. Even a normal sect wouldn't agree, much less Wukong's sword sect that was aiming to recover its former glory. Ice Dragon Sword's reputation was not loud in the ears of normal shouja of Sky Moon Jia, but to Jin Dan like him, Ice Dragon Sword's reputation was clear. Ha! Sanren is also troubled. This Suemo will not enter another sect, but Wukong's sword sect is definitely having a headache. Wei Fei's words were full of amusement. Wei Fei's words were accurate. Pei Yuanran felt an extreme migraine. Now that the situation was like this, he wasn't thinking about victory or defeat. In his perspective, victory did not matter, but how could he teach Suemo? Undoubtedly, after this competition, Suemo's fame in the field of formations would reach a new height. In their eyes, Suemo had originally been a problematic youth, extremely hard to deal with. Now, this problematic youth had become famous, very famous. Thinking that the sect would have a famous, wealthy, and extremely talented but problematic youth, Pei Yuanran felt like he was a mouse pulling a turtle, not knowing how to act. Right now, he did not know that Zuemo was penniless. Zuemo had won such a large sum of jingshi last time, even a sect leader like Pei Yuanran would never ever dream that Zuemo would be so crazy as to spend it all. Zuemo's heart jumped. The formation was under great pressure. He hadn't thought that Nan Men Yang would be so crazy, one blow after another, each blow stronger than the previous. Does Ji have a disagreement with you? Suemo was extremely furious. If this kept on going, this sky-ring moon chime formation would really quickly break under the brute force of this barbarian. He knew that he couldn't just set up formations again. If the formation broke, there was no meaning to him setting them up. Inside the sky-ring moon chime formation, Nan Men Yang had really gotten into the swing of it. He had given 7 or 8 blows, but it did not look like there was any effect on the formation. His thought was extremely simple: if he hadn't broken this thing yet, then it was because he didn't use enough power. Nan Men Yang went completely crazy. The golden light on his body brightened. Under that thick golden light, even the large sword seemed to be covered with a tangible gold light. His hair standing on end, he looked like a furious golden lion. His eyes turned golden, staring at the rings of light above the sky. They seemed to have felt the danger from Nan Men Yang. The rings of light that had been swimming freely started to gather around Nan Men Yang's position. The presence that Nan Men Yang emitted was truly too strong, like the sun in the dark of the night. Yu Bai's black face became even darker as he spotted the light, a cold light flashing through his eyes. He unhesitatingly twisted his body and started to fly in the direction of Nan Men Yang. Feeling the battle intent and strong presence from Nan Men Yang, everyone understood his next attack would be extremely powerful. Oh, is the formation about to break? Zhong Ming Yen thought with slight boredom. He swung the plum branch in his hand. Maybe he should go find an opponent. Who should he find? That Chang Heng seemed pretty strong. It wasn't just Zhong Ming Yen that thought so. Nan Men Yang's presence was truly too astonishing that even a person as unconcerned as Chang Heng usually was couldn't help but change expression. Su's expression changed dramatically. It was over. The next attack that Nan Men Yang would give, even she wouldn't dare to meet it. Any Xiuzha inside the formation wouldn't dare to meet Nan Men Yang's blow. But if Suemo lost, her flying sword, the formation was going to break. Her heart was filled with hopelessness. Just at this time, a change suddenly occurred. Arg! An angry howl that could rival Nan Men Yang suddenly sounded inside the formation. A gigantic golden person with blurred features came down from the sky and landed heavily in front of Nan Men Yang. Seal soldier. Nan Men Yang raised his golden eyes, and grinned. He was completely sunken into a berserker rage. Anyone that appeared in front of him would be immediately torn to pieces. Die! A roar like that of a lion, Nan Men Yang's eyes glared angrily, the golden light on his body even brighter, as he swung his giant sword with both hands heavily at the seal soldier. Feeling the threat and battle intent from Nan Men Yang, the seal soldier revealed a pair of eyes among the blurred features. A pair of eyes filled with indifference and pressure. Countless seals that covered the armor of the seal soldier like earthworms suddenly light up. Its thick left leg heavily stomped, causing the ground to shake. Its right leg soundlessly moved back, the right fist moving in front of its body. Its lower half positioned like a bow, while the right fist was like a readied arrow waiting to be launched. It faced the golden sword energy, and released its punch. Born to battle. An authoritative and deep voice sounded out like thunder rolling through the clouds. A tangible golden light fist shot forth from its punch like a heavy hammer and thundered forth. Golden sword energy versus golden light fist. Chapter 148 Seal Soldier Bam. The deep reverberation of the collision seemed to beat on everyone's hearts. There was no explosion like they had imagined, no light blazing in all directions. The two balls of golden light had been like two flames colliding with each other and extinguishing at the same time. Nan Men Yang's entire body shuddered, the anger inside his golden pupils increasing slightly. He shouted, "Go die!" The golden light of the large sword in his hands was even brighter than before, and it was like a shining sun. In the blink of an eye, even the crescent moon over the large formation seemed to have lost its sheen and become dull. Mountain Breaker Sword. The tip of the sword started to tilt downwards. The howl from the golden sword tip slicing past air started from a nearly non-existent sound and then suddenly, like a monster being torn apart, gave an extremely shrill shout. The completed sword energy of the golden sword was like a golden crescent moon, howling as it flew towards the seal soldier. The seals covering the body of the seal soldier became even brighter, like there were worms moving. On that blurred face, that pair of eyes became abnormally cold and distant, but its expression was indifferent as usual. Born to battle. The words were heavily enunciated out from the mouth of the seal soldier slowly and clearly, his leg moving as he prepared to punch. Another punch came. The golden light in the shape of a fist left its hand, the booming it created was like the lava roiling in the deep of the earth. It charged forward forcefully like it could not be blocked. Bam! It was another heavy and deep reverberation. The ground suddenly shook, also shaking people's hearts. Some shouja that had been watching changed their expressions and started to fall back. Nan Men Yang's gigantic figure shuddered again. The hairs that stood up on his head seemed to be blown by the wind restlessly. Both sword blows had been ineffective. The battle desire and the craziness in Nan Men Yang's chest shot to its peak. The golden pupils started to burn as if they were two golden balls of fire. The golden light over his body started to retreat inwards. On his body, a thin, almost tangible, and golden armor suddenly appeared. The thick golden energy that surrounded that gigantic sword in his hand spat and wavered like a flame. As though it felt the final battle had arrived, the bright seals on the silent seal soldier seemed to have come alive, like bugs that moved along the soldier's armor before quickly flowing towards the right fist it had beside its chest. The authoritative eyes of the seal soldier became even deeper, almost until it was a void, empty of everything. Go die. The angry roar was like a bolt of lightning. The blue-green mist around him suddenly exploded outward, with him at the center, clearing out one zhang of empty space. The power of one shout was extremely mighty. He slowly moved, creating a blow. There was not one speck of sound. But it was as though every muscle in Nan Men Yang's body was following this sword. When the sword was just halfway through the air, a suffocating pressure pressed the ground into cracking. Born to battle. The deep voice was not loud, but it carried a different kind of power that directly pierced the heart. A resolute conviction was in these words, filling everyone's hearts. All the seals on the body flooded into its right fist. Its body became extremely dull. The entire body, other than the fist that was even brighter than before, the other parts started to blur like it was golden mist that could dissipate at any time. Its action was the exact same as before. Step and then punch. A transparent fist exploded from its right fist, a fist that looked as though it was carved from clear crystal. The fist didn't hit Nan Men Yang. When it was halfway there, when Nan Men Yang's sword was in the midst of falling down, it suddenly exploded. Bam! This muffled sound was even deeper than the last two, but the shouja who saw this fist and hand, and heard this muffled thunderous sound, couldn't help but shake. Bam bam bam. Nan Men Yang went back 3 steps. The golden armor over his body became golden light again, his expression slightly wilted. Opposite him where the seal soldier had just been standing, there was nothing left. Good opponent. Nan Men Yang might be slightly wilted but still couldn't help but shout in admiration, his eyes slightly regretful as he looked at the spot the seal soldier had disappeared. Just as this time, Yu Bai's furious voice that was full of hatred passed into Nan Men Yang's ears. Nan Men Yang. I'll kill you. In the corner of the sky-ring moon chime formation, Zuemo spat out a mouthful of blood, startling to the eye when the bright red blood landed on the ground. He had been controlling the seal soldier. Nan Men Yang's last blow far surpassed the limits of his tolerance. He had just been controlling the seal soldier to face Nan Men Yang, yet he had been wounded in one blow. He couldn't help but feel deep awe at Nan Men Yang's power. He wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth, expressionlessly baring his teeth. Barbarian. Go play with Little White. Forcibly controlling the turbulent Ling power in his body, he gritted his teeth and continued to set up formations. The Xiuzha inside the formation had been enchanted and deeply shocked by the 3 rounds between Nan Menyang and the seal soldier. It was a straightforward competition of only brute power, there was no technique, no dodging. Many people were awed. Nan Menyang's strength had been judged to be not bad, but due to the fact he was a grassroots cultivator, he was not judged very highly by other people. The great majority only believed that he would have a pretty good future. No one could have thought that he would have such terrifying power. Thinking about Nan Menyang looking like a god of war just moments ago, many people's hearts became slightly cold. But what was even more unexpected to them was another person, Zhuemo. Seal soldiers might be rare, but it couldn't enter the eyes of these people. The absolute majority of sword Xiu would snort at these kinds of seals. Of course, the crux of the matter was the power. In the seal soldiers they had seen before, not one had been so powerful. Most importantly, the person controlling this seal soldier was a Xiuzha in the stages of Zhuji. This upturned many of the fixed ideas in their heads. The difference between stages was not something that just a seal soldier could change. However, Zhuemo accomplished it. Even though he had just been on par for 3 moves, but in the eyes of everyone else, it was already a miracle. Up until now, the weakest competitor of the sword test conference still hadn't shown his face. This undoubtedly implied another bit of information. Zhuemo still had tricks left. The great formation still was unmoved. The rings of light that had gathered over Nan Menyang's head had all dissipated, moving around freely like they did before. Zhuemo's surprising performance attracted the interest of many people. Like Changheng. He had only found the formation interesting, which was why he entered, but Zhuemo's strong performance created great interest from him. He was very curious, just how far could Zhuemo go? It wasn't just him that had the thought. In the air, Wuling Sanren sighed gently in surprise. Not bad. To be able to meet Nan Menyang head-on 3 times, he used the seal soldier well. A strange light came into Wei Fei's eyes. His consciousness seems very large. That is rarely seen. Is Wukong's sword sect also skilled in cultivating the spirit? Without consciousness, he can't afford to play with formations. Wuling Sanren said, expression normal. That's true. Wei Fei nodded and said. Behind the black gauze, Su's little mouth almost couldn't close. The shock that the 3 rounds had given her was too strong. Different from other people, she had seen Wang Xixiang at Lingying sect use the seal soldier when Zhuemo had gone to challenge Lingying sect. It looked as though it was the same seal soldier, but the difference in power was drastic. She suspected that this seal soldier could even defeat 3 of the seal soldiers she saw last time. Maybe, he really did have some moves, and didn't need her help. For the first time, she started to waver in her own thoughts. She suddenly remembered the words that Lin Qian Xixiang had said to her. A copper coin appeared in the hand that was hidden in her sleeve. At the center of a coin, an eye had been carved. The eye on the copper coin started to glow slightly. At the same time, the expression of the yellow-faced man slightly changed, his body became motionless. He seemed to have suddenly turned to a piece of rock, without any of the presence a person would have. The copper coin in Su's hand brightened and then extinguished. The rock in Su's heart landed. Everything about Lin Xixiang was good, but he was just slightly paranoid. Up until now, she still didn't quite believe what Lin Xixiang had said. If it wasn't that Lin Xixiang had taken out her sect's token, she probably would have already attacked him. Just now, someone used Fire Eye again. Pu Yao suddenly came out. Pu Yao suddenly came out. Zhuemo didn't have the time to pay attention to him. As long as you remain silent, no one can find you. You seem to have encountered trouble. Pu Yao asked in interest. In his eyes, Zhuemo was afraid of death, and always put his own security at the most important position. He hadn't ever saw Zhuemo respond like so when he was discussing the problem of safety with Zhuemo. This group of people is pouring salt onto the wound. Zhuemo gritted through his teeth, his hands not slowing. You want to give your all against them? Pu Yao clearly was laughing at his misfortunes. Zuo was too lazy to pay attention to this perverse Ren Yao who had nothing to do. You have the Yao seed, why don't you try to use the Yao seed to manipulate the consciousness and control the formation? Pu Yao kindly suggested. Use the Yao seed to manipulate the consciousness and control the formation. Zuo reflexively shook his head. The Skyring Moon Chime formation needs all 72 child formations to be completed before it can be controlled. You don't just have the Skyring Moon Chime formation. Pu Yao said disapprovingly. Right. Why hadn't he thought of that? Zuo felt his vision light up. He had made a great misunderstanding. All of his mind had been thinking about completing the 72 child formation, Skyring Moon Chime formation, and completely forgot that he hadn't just set up the formations for Skyring Moon Chime formation. This was an extremely large-scale formation belt. Actually, other than increasing the rate your consciousness grows, the Yao seed's other use is splitting your mind. Pu Yao was strangely good today. It was extremely rare that he would take the initiative and teach Zuo without Zuo needing to pay Jingshi. Splitting my attention. Zuo irritably rolled his eyes. At this time, you want me to split my attention? The so-called splitting the mind is referring to splitting your consciousness into several parts, all of them working at the same time on their own matters. Pu Yao said faintly. The great majority of Yao will split this consciousness, and some Yao are born with this ability. Truly powerful Yao are able to split their consciousness into thousands of portions, and are peerlessly strong. But at this time, Zuo completely did not think about why Pu Yao was so strange today. He was shocked by Pu Yao's words. It was like a bolt of lightning hitting his mind. Consciousness splitting. If he split his consciousness and they all did their own things at once. Up until now, he had always thought of the consciousness as one whole entity, and had never thought about splitting the consciousness to do different things at once. He suddenly thought of Ling power. Ling power could break off and merge. Was the consciousness like Ling power as well, able to be broken up and merged together? If it really was possible. Zuo's hands, which hadn't stopped since the beginning, suddenly stopped in the air. Chapter 149 Fire. Watching Yu Bai and Nan Menyang embroiled in battle, no one could look away. Just having gone 3 rounds, Nan Menyang was completely suppressed by Yu Bai, unable to lift his head under the blows. Yu Bai didn't use his usual style of fighting, instead each blow was vicious, decisive, and aimed to kill, causing a chill to creep into the hearts of everyone watching inside the formation. When a composed person was angry, it was very frightening. Probably the only person that found it boring was Changheng. This level of fighting and killing, it really couldn't alert his mind. He scanned the surroundings. Everyone had stopped their actions. The 3 rounds between Nan Menyang and the seal soldier had shaken the skies, and attracted almost all the Shouja inside the formation. Right now, the fight between Nan Menyang and Yu Bai was not as blood-rousing as the previous fight, but the technique was no less spectacular. One had a grassroots background with no family or sect, the other the beloved disciple of the ruler of Dongfu. Once the two really became serious, the scene was amazingly spectacular, the spectators becoming intoxicated. Without detecting it, all the Shouja inside the formation had gathered together again. Changheng raised his head to look at the rings of light swimming in the air and the crescent moon high up, his expression slightly moved. He took away his gaze because he noticed, not far away, Zhongming Yan was looking at him. Their gazes met midair, striking like 2 extremely sharp swords, sparks flying. 2 stubborn and proud young experts exchanged a look. Fight? Zhongming Yan opened coldly, his gaze full of challenge. Not interested. Changheng only glanced at Zhongming Yan before moving his eyes back towards the sky. The rings of light that were freely swimming in the air seemed to be more attractive for him. Zhongming Yan's eyes slightly shrunk, but he didn't make another challenge. Changheng's viciousness and brutality was the greatest in the sword test conference. Every competitor, when they faced this brute, couldn't help but shrink inwards, including Zhongming Yan. Zhong Ming Yan's expression turned back to normal as he said faintly, "Why don't we use the breaking of the formation to wager victory and defeat?" Chang Heng's face was still upraised, not looking at Zhong Ming Yan even once, as he said, "Oh, I'm afraid you might not even break it." Zhong Ming Yan could clearly feel Chang Heng's low opinion, and his expression was extremely ugly. He snorted coldly. "You may be underestimating me a little too much. You could try." Chang Heng pointed at the sky, and said, "Face normal." Hearing this, Zhong Ming Yan was too lazy to respond to Chang Heng. The 7-plum sword appeared in his hand. A shake of the wrist, and 3 plum flowers turned to 3 streams of light that flew into the sky. Zhong Ming Yan wanted Chang Heng to see his strength, so his first move was his most accomplished, 3 play. 3 sword essences were like 3 slinking fish as they circled around and shot at the crescent moon in the sky. Zuo had been pondering how to split his consciousness when he suddenly detected an abnormality in the formation and instantly woke up. Fuck, would they never stop? Having just made a tiny bit of headway, Zuo was so angry he swore. When he found the person responsible was Zhong Ming Yan, the anger in his heart shot upwards. He remembered. This guy was the first person that had made trouble. It was an anger that came from the chest, and hate from the gallbladder. Zuo's anger erupting from his heart, instantly sunk into his second rage. Ji's long found this guy an eyesore. Zuo's eyes were green. The 2 hands that had stopped started again. He finally understood. Given the time and place, it wasn't the moment good time to ponder about how to split his consciousness. These people that had poured salt onto the wound might all be terribly evil, but each of them had the power to damage the formation. If he couldn't complete the 72-child formation, Skyring Moonchime formation, he couldn't do anything to them. Without him detecting it, he had started to think of ways to deal with the experts inside the formation. He completely forgot that each person in there had power that far surpassed him. However, Zuo was facing the same difficult problem as before. He must, before he could complete the 72-child formation, Skyring Moonchime formation, stop these people from damaging it. The 72-child formations were just on the edge of completion, and these people had come out again to make a mess. Just now, he had used up the seal soldier to stop Nan Menyang from breaking the formation. Now, what could he use to stop Zhong Ming Yan from breaking the formation? Did you think Ji only had a seal soldier? Zuo gritted his teeth as he cursed Zhong Ming Yan inside 100 times. But, at the same time, his consciousness silently flowed forth like a stream of water. His body slightly leaned forward, his back curved. He looked like a curved bow from far away. He maintained this strange position without moving, only his eyes slightly narrowed like a hunter waiting for his prey. Zhong Ming Yan's 3 sword essences were like piranhas that landed in a rich swarm of fish. Any ring of light that tried to come near the sword essences were instantly sliced to pieces. The 3 spiraling sword energies did not look like they were affected at all. Carrying a hiss that could shock souls, they headed straight for the crescent moon in the sky. In his eyes, that bright moon was clearly the crux to breaking the formation. If he could destroy the moon, the entire formation would be solved. The layers of light rings were like a thick coat, unable to be damaged by knife or axe. But if a narrow needle was pushed, it could easily pierce through this layer of cloth. The 3 sword energies did not stop their spinning, forming a sharp cutting formation. Each sword energy was like the sharpest blade, its penetrating power far surpassing normal sword energies. The rings of light that had blocked his, 1 cut plum, were easily penetrated when faced with this, 3 play. The sword energies were as fast as lightning, nothing that the rings of light could catch up to. But the rings of light seemed to be alive. Knowing they couldn't block the sword energies, they headed towards Zhong Ming Yan. Ring after ring of light landed from the sky, heading to cover Zhong Ming Yan. Even as powerful as Zhong Ming Yan was, he didn't easily experiment. Everyone had a deep impression of the Xiuzha that was eliminated. Paired sparrow flying. 2 plum flowers fell off the plum branch like 2 butterflies, flying around Zhong Ming Yan. Once the rings of light came at Zhong Ming Yan from the sky, a clear cracking sound could be heard before they were blown to pieces, turning into countless scattered energies. However, the rings of light did not give up moving towards Zhong Ming Yan. Clink clink clink. The dense crisp sounds were like hundreds of glass cups being smashed at once. The broken energies fell and floated around Zhong Ming Yan, and then were blown away by the winds created by the two plum flowers. Amidst the broken energies, Zhong Ming Yan was unharmed. Young people really have energy. The yellow-faced male had appeared at some time beside Chang Heng and snickered. Chang Heng still was looking at the sky, and responded indifferently, "He's dumb." He, that's good. It will let us save some energy." The yellow-faced man smiled and said. Chang Heng heard this, and turned to look at the yellow-faced male. "Who are you searching for?" "Searching for?" The yellow-faced man seemed to not understand. "Your strength is greater than anyone here." Chang Heng said faintly, "Hiding your strength, not competing for a rank, you naturally have other goals. You've been constantly running here and there, and look as though you are trying to find something. This is Great Pine Pavilion. I've never heard there was anything good there. That means there is only one possibility, you are trying to find someone." The smile on the yellow-faced male's face disappeared, his eyes gradually turning sharp as a knife. Chang Heng's face was as indifferent as usual. The yellow-faced man suddenly clapped his hands and smiled. "Others only know you for your viciousness and bloodthirst. No one would think you have such a mind for details. I underestimated you. We do not have a conflict." Chang Heng, from beginning to end, had a calm expression as though he was speaking of something that had no bearing on him. The yellow-faced man lightly sighed. "Not here." He could not disguise the disappointment. "That's a pity," Chang Heng said, face calm. But he didn't say why it was a pity. In Zhuo Mo's sea of consciousness, Pu sat on the gravestone, his eyes looking into the distance. There was a mirth floating at the corner of his mouth that was somewhat hard to decipher. It seemed slightly scornful, slightly reminiscent, slightly lonely, slightly cold. Different from Pu Yao, who was as steady as Mount Tai, Zhuo Mo was like the arrow that was on the thread that would sever at a touch. That crescent moon might not be the cover door, but if it was attacked, Zhuo Mo also knew what would happen. The time did not allow him to think more. 3 blue lights that were like chains suddenly appeared, dragon tying formation. The position the blue chains appeared were extremely precise, exactly on the path that the spiraling sword energies would pass. Different than the dragon tying formation that Zhuo Mo had used before, once the 3 blue chains appeared, they knotted into a clasp that could perfectly restrain the 3 sword energies. The 3 sword energies headed straight into the clasp. The strength of the clasp far surpassed Zhong Ming Yan's expectations, it didn't break. Just as Zhong Ming Yan paused, a web of fire suddenly appeared in the sky. An enormous, dense and deep blue web of fire. The 7 green wood flags absorbed the water power, continuously turning it into wood power. Beside each green wood flag, there were 7 second-grade little copper lion head cauldrons. Deep red flames spat out from the mouth of the lion heads on the copper lion head cauldrons and gathered in the air. After gathering, the redness of the flames became fainter. Around each of the 7 cauldrons, with 12 jade cards as bone, and the red gold thread as the channels, it formed a 3-turn fire formation. After 3 turns, the fire was almost completely clear. 7 near-transparent flames flew in the sky, crisscrossing in the air. The 7 by 7 49 Little Dan Cauldrons Formation A, Greatly Fire Formation. Once the formation formed, each string of fire shook. The nearly transparent flames changed again, and became tinged with a slightly tranquil blue. This was the enormous tranquil blue web of fire that everyone saw up in the air. The tranquil blue web of fire perfectly blocked the 3 sword energies and Zhong Ming Yan. Zhong Ming Yan's expression slightly changed. This web of fire had actually cut the connection between him and the 3 sword energies. At the same time, the blue dragon tying chains that was around the 3 sword energies suddenly pulled and swung towards the side. Bam! In the end, the blue dragon tying chains was not able to stop the three combined sword essences, and was shred into pieces. But with this pull and swing, the aim of the three sword essences diverged. They brushed past that crescent moon, entering the air and disappeared. Everyone was shocked still by the fire web that suddenly appeared over their heads. The tranquil blue threads of fire were silent. It was like there was an enormous and tranquil blue spider web over their heads. But many of them did not pale because of the thick tranquil blue fire threads. Instead, the terrifying heat that was released startled everyone. The flame was tranquil blue. How high would its temperature reach? The tranquil blue web of fire freely burned on. The interior of the formation had become an enormous Dan cauldron. In the air, Wuling Sanren and Wei Fei saw this extremely awe-inspiring scene. The moisture of the half-moose-sized pond roiled, abnormally lively. They turned to streams of water power, continuously flooding into the green wood flag masts. The green and silent wood energy entered the copper lion head cauldrons, turning into deep red fire power, then through the three-turn fire formation, it then entered the greatly fire formation, and knotted into a web. Wei Fei stared with wide eyes, muttering to himself, uncanny workmanship. Godly technique. Chapter 150, New Target. Zhua Mo was in a predicament. Bean-sized beads of sweat flowed down his face. He had underestimated the difficulty of controlling this greatly fire seal formation. To pursue power, he had done his best to strengthen the formation from every aspect. The direct result was the difficulty in controlling the formation had also increased. Behind the spectacular display, the series of manipulations he had done were all highly difficult. Even though Zhua Mo's skill and control had increased, the unexpected difficulty of controlling the formation had created a great problem for him. His body shook like dice. In a short moment, sweat suddenly started to appear on his body. In a moment he appeared to have been just dunked in water. It was too hard. Damn it. Zhua Mo cautiously began using all of his consciousness to control every tiny change in the formation. Formations were a kind of work that demanded meticulousness. Any kind of mistake could create an extremely large effect, and cause the effect of the formation to vary drastically. The complexity of a formation belt that was composed of many kinds of formations that were maximized for effect was even more so. Zhua Mo did not notice that he had bitten through his lips, and blood was seeping out. His consciousness was using the five-colored pagoda to carefully control the web of fire. Having finally stopped Zhong Mingyan's attack, Zhua Mo didn't have the time to rejoice. He had reached his limits, the web of fire was almost out of control. Zhua Mo's eyes widened into circles, the tendons in his forehead pulsing. If he lost control of the fire web, for him, that meant failure. The temperature of the tranquil blue fire was the strongest flame that he had ever seen since he learned Dan making. The uncontrolled fire web would collapse in an instant, and the flowing tranquil blue fire would destroy all of the formations. That was definitely not allowed. But he had reached the last of his endurance. He could feel the Ling power in his body quickly depleting. His weak cultivation once again became his Achilles heel. However, he had no time to think about this right now. He had to make a choice. He didn't even pause to think. Grunting, he gathered the last of his power. The gigantic tranquil blue fire suddenly pushed downwards. The Xiuzhe in the formation below instantly moved. Did Zhua Mo want to get them all at once? He didn't know his power. A cold smile appeared on the corner of many of the Xiuzhe's mouths. From their perspective, a Zhuji Xiuzhe was sending them a challenge through this method. These people whose eyes were always looking upwards, how could they bear a Zhuji looking down at them? Many competitors were preparing eagerly to try to test the power of the web of fire. Just at this time, a deep and raspy sound suddenly echoed through the formation. Bind! The web of fire that had covered the sky suddenly shrunk extremely, heading for Zhong Mingyan. This caused the Xiuzhe that had prepared to fight to pause. They instantly revealed expressions of anticipation to see the result. No one would be dumb to block the web of fire for Zhong Mingyan. Anger came onto Zhong Mingyan's face. He gave a heavy snort. His expression serious, the 7-plumb sword in his hand turned to a flash of dark light that headed for the web of fire. As the 7-plumb sword entered the air, it turned to a gigantic sword energy, forcefully piercing the net. The tranquil blue fire web unexpectedly shrunk again, actually taking along the sword and person to the middle of the web. When the sword energy sliced the web of fire, Zhuemo spat out a handful of blood again, his face becoming even paler. But did the situation allow him to retreat? He suddenly bit the tip of his tongue, the salty and fishy taste of blood making his mind alert. He suddenly pushed out his last bit of power. His spiritual and Ling power was almost empty at this time. Zhuemo was bleeding from his nose and mouth, but he did not detect it. The last bit of consciousness burrowed into the 5-colored pagoda. The 5-colored pagoda suddenly burst in light. Under the crescent moon, it flashed with 5-colored light. Zhong Mingyan's expression finally changed. The web of fire had not neared him, but the rising temperature was already enough for him to feel fear. He didn't dare to hold anything back. He jumped into the air, closely following the flying sword. All his Ling power was channeled into the flying sword. There was only one thought in his mind: break out of this web of fire. Using all his power, the sword essence of the 7-plumb sword suddenly was as sharp as the cold wind at the top of a cliff. Suddenly, it was like there was an old winter plum standing in the wind. Hiss! The flying sword broke through the fire web. Zhong Mingyan felt joy, but just at this time, a change occurred. Die! Zhuemo's muffled shout was like thunder, rolling and exploding inside the formation. The web of fire suddenly retreated inwards to the center. Zhong Mingyan felt that the tranquil blue flame was all around him, as though he was inside a large Dan cauldron, and would turn to ash at any instant. Fear in his heart, he hurriedly activated the Ling armor. Countless tranquil blue flames landed on Zhong Mingyan's body. Ah! Zhong Mingyan shrieked, the light of the flying sword suddenly becoming disordered. Just as everyone assumed that Zhong Mingyan would lose his life, the countless tranquil blue flames suddenly disappeared. Yet there were still many flames that had landed on Zhong Mingyan's Ling armor. Dongqi sword sect was not famous for its defense. The power of these tranquil blue flames were astounding. Even with the protection of the Ling armor, Zhong Mingyan was in terrible straits. His entire body was burnt black, Ling armor completely damaged. He was like a piece of wood burnt black, dropping from the sky. The other Xiuzhe inside the formation all inhaled in shock. Who was the person dropping down? It was Zhong Mingyan. This formation was truly too strong, even Zhong Mingyan had been defeated. The Xiuzhe that had wanted to try solving the formation instantly stopped in their tracks. When they saw the unconscious Zhong Mingyan and the terrible state of his body as he laid on the ground, they really didn't bear to look at him. Holy moly! Even Zhong Mingyan wasn't a match. Was this formation really just something a Zhuji had made? The same question flowed through every Xiuzhe inside the formation. Zhuemo hadn't put all of his effort in at the end. If he hadn't stopped, then all of the tranquil blue flames would have bombarded Zhong Mingyan. It would have been hard to say if Zhong Mingyan would have managed to survive. In other words, the formation that Zhuemo set up was able to kill a Ningmai Xiuzhe. Everyone jumped in fright. In one moment, all the Xiuzhe that had been fighting in the formation completely stopped attacking each other. A serious expression came onto their faces. They were still inside the formation. But what they didn't realize was that Zhuemo had no intentions of letting the Zhong Mingyan off. At the end, even his mind had been blurred. How would he know when to stop? All of his spiritual and Ling power had been used up. He had fainted, which was what had caused the flames to disappear. When Zhuemo slowly woke up from unconsciousness, the desire for battle and courage had long ago flew into the horizons. As expected, the ignorant had no fear. Just now, he had actually been locked in combat directly with Zhong Mingyan. He suddenly tilted his head. He remembered now. Before he had fainted, he had actually defeated Zhong Mingyan. He grinned, but with his expressionless face, it looked extremely strange. How long had he been unconscious? He struggled to get up, looking at the surroundings. He was still inside the formation. The people still hadn't solved the formation. Zhuo felt that this was extremely absurd. Even now, he still found it hard to accept that he had just defeated Zhong Mingyan. Zhuo didn't know that he had just been unconscious for the time of an incense stick. This was due to his extremely deep practice of Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't practice that, it would have been many days until he would wake up. And he would never have predicted that in the time that he had been unconscious, no one tried to break the formation. It was the opposite. The Xiuzhe in the formation started to attack other people, no matter if it was Su or Gui Feng. Even Chang Heng had entered the fight. The other people started to clean up the other Xiuzhe inside the formation. Wu Ling Sanren and Wei Fei had started to get busy. Chang Heng and the others were acting out of caution. They had just seen the power of the formation. No one dared to be careless. To solve the formation, they had to put in all their power. But if there were opponents beside them, who would dare to give their all? If Zhuo thought of all this, he would definitely feel proud of himself. A cultivator just in Zhuji that made so many Ningmai wary and put them on the defensive, it was enough to be proud. However, Zhuo had just woken up and his gaze had landed on the incomplete, sky-ring moon chime formation. In reality, while it looked like he had won the battle against Zhong Mingyan, but in reality, he had accomplished it through self-harm. The wounds he had received when controlling the seal soldier to face Nan Menyang had worsened and he completely lost the power to keep fighting. So unprofitable. The first thought that popped into Zhuo's mind was this. Looking at these sky-ring moon chime child formations, the pain in his heart reached a peak, far more painful than the pain from his physical body. So many Jingshi were wasted. He had bought all of these materials from the 100 Treasures Flying Pavilion in order to attend this competition. He felt like he had taken a large sum of Jingshi, and made an extremely incorrect investment. It looked like he hadn't gained anything at all, and lost everything. No. Definitely not. Zhuo gritted his teeth and sat up. He had to finish the 72 child formation, sky ring moon chime formation. He wasn't thinking of the Kunlun Jade Scroll. His actions were just to not waste all the materials he had already used. He had spent so many materials, he had to hear a sound from them. As he endured the pain, Zhuo comforted himself so. Right now, he completely did not have any energy to continue, so he sat down and meditated. He needed to quickly recover his Ling and spiritual power. Otherwise, he wouldn't even get to hear a sound. Consequently, an extremely strange scene appeared. Zhuo was safely meditating in the formation to recover Ling and spiritual power while Chang Heng and the others were engaged in fierce combat inside the formation. The other Xiuzhe might not be as good as the experts, but the ones that dared to enter the formation were not ordinary in their power. These Xiuzhe were not stupid. They instantly knew what Chang Heng and the others intended, and naturally would not wait to be eliminated. If one person couldn't win, then two of them would fight together. Amidst the shouts, the howls of the flying swords, the bangs and crashes, Zhuo silently meditated. 45 minutes later, he finally opened his eyes. In possession of the Mo matrix and Yao seed, he recovered Ling and spiritual power. With the exception of Pu Yao, he had never encountered a Xiuzhe that could recover faster than himself. Yet even in this little span of time, only 5 people were left remaining in the formation. Su, Gui Feng, Chang Heng, the yellow-faced man, Luo Li, Yu Bai and Nan Menyang had fought too hard and expended too much energy. It could be said that both of them had lost. They had been tricked by Chang Heng and the yellow-faced man working together. As for the other people, they had been eliminated even earlier on. The pitiful Zhong Mingyan had been saved by Wu Ling Sanren a long time ago. Zhuo did not attend to the 5 people. Pushing down his wounds, he kept on setting up the sky ring moon chime formation. The target that he gave himself right now was extremely realistic: finish the 72 child formation, sky ring moon chime formation. If he couldn't get the jade scroll, he'd get experience. Chapter 151, Comprehension. Su suddenly moved next to Luoli. Luoli silently put up his guard. You are Zhuo Mo's Xixiang. Su decided she would do it herself. Up until now, that soft rice zombie still hadn't responded at all. The soft rice zombie might not care about victory, but she had to. Luoli made a sound in surprise. One for each of us. Su spoke very quickly. I picked Gui Feng. Luoli was even more surprised. Was she Zhuo Mo's friend? Was it true or false? His brain moved quickly, balancing the advantages and disadvantages. He was still on his guard, but his mouth did not hesitate in saying, okay, I pick the yellow-faced one. Even if he could not judge the sincerity, but from every angle, there was no detriment to him. The two split apart. The other three people clearly heard the words between the two people. Changheng was not affected. The yellow-faced male smiled. Gui Feng vanished where he stood. Everyone was extremely cooperative, each person finding a place to fight. Only Changheng was left at the original spot, raising his head to look at the rings of light, sinking into his thoughts. Zhuo Mo didn't pay attention to what was happening in the formation. After making a decision, he didn't move from it. The wounds on his body were greatly affecting him. When he channeled Ling power, there would be a bit of a pause. Ever since he had started practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, it had been a long time since he had tasted the pain of spiritual wounds. But in the last two fights, even his most skilled consciousness could not avoid being injured. This was the result of fighting a battle that crossed stages. Even if he managed to use the formation as help, he still could not avoid being injured. However, on the surface, no one would think that his channels and internal organs were wounded. His gaze was concentrated and calm, clear and serene without a stray thought. The finger movements were not lightning fast as before, but it was still flowing, and gave onlookers another kind of beauty. In the air, Wuling Sanren couldn't help but exclaim, this boy would definitely accomplish great things. Wei Fei also had an expression of admiration. With Zhuji cultivation, to be able to block 3 full-force blows from Nan Men Yen, to seriously wound Zhong Ming Yen, he has enough to be proud. The heavens really have heavily blessed Wukong sword sect. One Wei Sheng, one Zhuo Mo, there will be no worries for 100 years. For some reason, Wuling Sanren suddenly sighed. Such a pity they are not born at the right time. When the nest is attacked, would any egg escape? Such talent, if they fall early, it would be a pity. Wei Fei roared in laughter. I have the opposite opinion from Sanren. It is because they have outstanding talent that they need to undergo more grinding. Heroes are born in troubled times. Without troubled times, it is rare to see heroes. Hearing this, Wuling Sanren said, self-mockingly. Brother Wei is right. I'm old now. Without a stray thought on his mind, or desire for victory, Zhuo Mo was extremely calm. The speed that he made formations increased greatly without his own knowledge. He seemed to not have to think, and the materials would flow past from his fingers, the spells naturally cast, everything smooth and flowing. In a short time, the 72 child formation, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, actually was completed. He dazedly looked at the big formation, and he seemed to be in slight disbelief, yet was also slightly thoughtful. In this short amount of time, he seemed to have experienced very much. A hard fight, receiving serious wounds, fainting and then waking up, all of this caused his mood to go from shaking to peaceful. In the beginning he was filled with anticipation, the desire for victory, only to have his hopes dashed. He was left with only the desire to wound the enemies. Finally he was forced to focus on only one thing, to exclude all other thoughts and not think about victory. He stood dazedly inside the formation, motionless like a statue. On the top of the main peak, the battle between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping was still ongoing. Wei Sheng's vision was a sea of blood, blurred. There were countless sword wounds on his body, the bleeding was dyeing his clothing. His features were blurred. He looked as though he was a person made from blood. Many in the audience that were watching almost couldn't bear to keep watching at this time. Even Tian Songzi hadn't resisted coming over, and asking if he should stop the battle. Pei Yuan Ran did not stop the fight. But he didn't realize that inside his tight fist, his fingernails had deeply cut into the flesh. Gu Rongping wasn't in good shape either. There were 3 sword cuts on his body. The 3 sword cuts were not deep, but the fresh blood had dyed a patch on his chest. His sword essence was still as free and traceless as before, but the audience could easily detect his exhaustion. No one would feel that Gu Rongping didn't have enough power. After fighting so hard for such a long period of time, exhaustion was an extremely normal state. Gu Rongping knew his own situation was worsening as time flowed, but he had no solution. 2 hours ago, Wei Sheng had been covered in wounds, almost wavering. But after 2 hours, Wei Sheng was still persisting. He seemed as though he could collapse at any moment, but he did not. Every time, Gu Rongping would feel that if he just put in a bit more power, he could defeat Wei Sheng, but after he put in the power, he found that, other than leaving behind a sword mark on the other's body, he didn't accomplish anything. Wei Sheng still endured. He hadn't managed to wait for Wei Sheng to collapse, yet Gu Rongping found that he had sunk into a dilemma without being aware of it. The 3 sword marks on his body were the proof. His sword scripture was like unspun silk from a cocoon, setting up a large web to snare the other, and then slowly wear away at the strength of his opponent, to let them lose all room to breathe and die. He had successfully pinned down his opponent, but his opponent had not stopped struggling. The 2 sides entered a standoff. The other's hardiness had far surpassed his expectations. His Ling power had quickly been consumed. His sword energies had slowly lost their edge. His movements started to become slower. The other had caught onto his weakness and counterattacked. The longer he fought, the heavier the terror in Gu Rongping's heart grew. Wei Sheng was like a wild beast that did not know exhaustion, like a seal soldier that did not have life, and did not know pain. When the sword energy flashed past his body, other than a muffled grunt, other than seeing the spray of blood, there was no other observable signs that he was affected. The fight between the hunter and the wild beast, the hunter was gradually losing the advantage. Zhuo Mo's formation belt allowed people to see a spectacle, and made people feel surprise. Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping's battle made people feel awe that came deep from their hearts. Time slowly slipped by. The sound of discussion became increasingly quieter. Even more people felt they were unable to keep watching. Seeing a person entirely covered in blood, fighting without a sound as he struggled painstakingly, and flying through the air as his figure wavered. The blood that was flowing down his body flung into the air. No one was in the mood to speak. Even though Wei Sheng had not won, but in everyone's eyes there was only his blood-covered figure. The battle inside the Great Pine Pavilion was still continuing. The Skyring Moon Chime formation had attracted the majority of the experts. Many people had cheered as they assumed their chances of entering the top 10 would increase. However, the developments were completely the opposite of what they imagined. Without the pressure of the experts, many shouja that had decided to hide themselves did not have pressure and lost their patience. They did not hide in the corners any longer. The combat became even more fierce. However, no one dared to near Skyring Moon Chime formation, and no one dared to near the main peak. The Skyring Moon Chime formation was like a mysterious beast, its bloody maw wide open. No one knew the situation inside it. The fierce fight on top of the main peak made many shouja inside the Great Pine Pavilion feel terror, deep terror. Even the judges in the Great Pine Pavilion put their attentions on those 2 places, and wished all the other fights would instantly finish. Zhuo Mo felt that he seemed to have dropped into an enormous gray bubble. All around him was full of a strange gray material. Even though he was wearing Ling armor, but the Ling armor did not separate him from the gray matter. He seemed to be swimming naked. It didn't seem warm, but it wasn't cold. It was a strange sensation. The only feeling he could describe was familiar. He seemed to be very familiar with this gray material. What was this gray material? He seemed to understand everything, but did not understand anything at all. He reached out to grab, but didn't catch anything. Where was this? What was it? He felt that he should know, but no matter how he thought, he could not remember. He was slightly stunned. The surroundings did not provide any hints to him. His only clue was the feeling of familiarity. What really was this? Zuomo couldn't help furrowing his brows as he started to think deeply. He felt that he needed to find the answer. He reflexively reached and grasped at the gray material. Same as last time, he didn't grasp anything. This material was like air, invisible and intangible. Zuomo thought inside. Wait, invisible and intangible. Zuomo suddenly jumped. He knew what this was. Consciousness. This was consciousness. The moment he told himself this was consciousness, the feeling of familiarity inside his body instantly grew stronger. At the same time, the scenery around him suddenly changed. Below him, there was a place that looked like a little island far away. There was a patch of flame on the little island, countless crimson flames dancing. A gravestone, and a male wearing black sitting on top. There was also a ruler-straight river. The river was very muddled, with two kinds of colors that could barely be made out. Sea of Consciousness. This was the Sea of Consciousness. Zuomo was very shocked when he saw Pu Yao on top of the gravestone. He couldn't help but shout, but no matter how hard he tried to shout, Pu Yao did not hear him. He had to give up, and started to scan the surroundings. The entire Sea of Consciousness was surrounded by this gray material. This was completely different than what Zuomo had thought before. In the Sea of Consciousness, in his memories, what he saw in the surroundings was a pitch-black void, without anything but the stars in the sky. Right. He remembered that there were 4 stars in the void. As expected, when he raised his head to look up, he saw the stars. There were 4 stars in the sky. One of them was the brightest, the other 3 slightly duller. Before, every time he entered the Sea of Consciousness, he felt the 4 stars were very distant. At this time, he found that the 4 stars were like 4 little boats, floating on the outside of the consciousness. He seemed to have comprehended something. At this time, the 4 stars suddenly started to shed starlight. The starlight was like silver sand, slowly absorbed into the gray consciousness. But the gray consciousness was too big. That bit of starlight was pitifully small. But the 4 stars continuously poured down starlight at a slow pace. Zuomo didn't know what was the use of these silver-grained starlight, but clearly, his consciousness seemed to be starting a kind of transformation. Wei Fei and Wu Ling Sanren were absorbed in the fight between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. Not just them, but all of the judges in the Great Pine Pavilion were watching this tragic fight. Suddenly, Wu Ling Sanren seemed to have detected something, and turned his face. He unconsciously looked at the large formation under his feet. Just one look, and his gaze was stuck. Inside the formation, Zuomo's arms were spread open like he was going to embrace something. He was woodenly standing on the spot, his eyes empty and lifeless. Around him, the air seemed like burning firewood, occasionally producing soft explosions. Chapter 152, Stardust. The explosions around Zuomo became even dense. With the naked eye, it was possible to see the air continuously exploding, and producing small whirlpools. Wu Ling Sanren was skilled in formations, because of this his consciousness was strong. Yet he found when his consciousness was 1 zhang away from Zuomo, it seemed to have touched a wall that he could not penetrate. He made a sound of surprise. He was in the stage of Jindan. Zuomo was just in Zhuji. Theoretically, Zuomo's consciousness was not something that could resist his own. But the present situation was he was blocked. This kind of situation usually happened only when both sides were similar in power. He quickly calmed down from his surprise. He guessed that Zhuo Mo's consciousness was undergoing a transformation. The explosions around Zhuo Mo made him even more certain of his prediction. Compared to Ling power, Xiuzhe understood much less about the spirit. Even Jindan Xiuzhe like Wu Ling Sanren wouldn't dare to say they had a good understanding of the spirit. On the market, there were countless jade scrolls on cultivating Ling power, but the number of jade scrolls for cultivating spiritual power were pitifully small, and they were not in demand. It was the most unpopular of the unpopular. In all the Xiuzhe, most of those skilled in the spirit were formation Xiu, but even formation Xiu still primarily used Ling power. It was like the Diana. They called themselves the greatest at body cultivation, but in reality, they still cultivated Ling power primarily. Wu Ling Sanren might be skilled in formations, but he wasn't a formation Xiu, but a sword Xiu. In such a backwater little Jia like Sky Moon Jia dominated by sword Xiu, how was it possible to find good scriptures for cultivating the spirit? Wu Ling Sanren's spirit scripture was a small branch of his sect's scripture. Due to that, he became interested in formations, and cultivated it for a while. But, that was just his hobby. A sword Xiu could only have one job, that was, to cultivate the sword. Wu Ling Sanren did not know what was really happening in Zhuo Mo's spirit. Wei Fei, who had been alarmed by Wu Ling Sanren's sound, looked at Zhuo Mo once before he took away his gaze. He was also a Jindan and naturally could see that a transformation was taking place in Zhuo Mo's consciousness. But in his view, the spirit was not the true path. So what if one's spirit was powerful? Wu Ling Sanren thought for a while. Not being able to come to any answers, he turned his eyes back to Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. Zhuo Mo felt his consciousness silently start to change as the starlight penetrated, but what change was it? Looking at the starlight continuously produced by the stars slowly spread out in his consciousness, he had a feeling that this transformation would continue for a time. The speed that the starlight spread was very slow. If it needed to spread through all of the area that the consciousness occupied, the time needed was not short. His gaze leaving the consciousness, he started to ponder the consciousness splitting that Pu Yao told him. In front of him, the consciousness was so clear. This was the first time that he had seen his consciousness. He didn't know if this was an illusion, or his own delusion. He felt it was hard to decipher, so he didn't think about it. Because the consciousness was so close he could almost touch it, he naturally thought about consciousness splitting. Pu Yao did not tell him how to separate the consciousness. Zhuo Mo looked at the surroundings. All around him was the consciousness, like the endless gray matter. The sea of consciousness was enveloped at the very center of the consciousness. The stars floated on the outside of the consciousness. It was so large, yet shapeless and intangible. Zhuo Mo didn't know what to do. He tried to communicate with the surrounding consciousness like he usually did. The moment he thought, the gray consciousness around him started to flood towards him. A short while later, there was a ball of consciousness on his hand. Zhuo Mo was joyful. It was this easy. But before he could be happy for a while, the ball of consciousness on his hand disappeared. As expected, it wouldn't be so simple. He wasn't demotivated. He was not surprised at the result. Since the first time he heard the words, consciousness splitting, he felt it wouldn't be so simple. After that, he tried all kinds of experiments and concluded many things. It was true that he could control the consciousness here, and it was very easy to control. But the consciousness was like sand. It could easily be squeezed into a ball in the hand, but once he let go, it would collapse into a pile. Once Zhuo Mo's thought moved away, the consciousness would return to its original state. Zhuo Mo felt that it was not correct. In his understanding, the consciousness that was separated should have a certain initiative of its own. Otherwise, what would be the difference compared to him separating his consciousness into separate parts? The consciousness was shapeless and intangible, and so it could be manipulated into any shape. When he was using the Greatly Fire formation to fight against Zhong Ming Yan, Zhuo Mo had used a similar technique. At the time, he needed to control Dragon Tying Formation, Leaf Fire Formation, Three-Turn Formation, and Great Leaf Fire Formation at the same time. In order to control all four formations, Zhuomo's skill with the consciousness had reached an extremely detailed level. At that time, his consciousness had been like an octopus with 4 tentacles which he used to control the 4 formations at the same time. From a technical viewpoint, that wasn't truly controlling them simultaneously because there was an order to the formations. It could be more appropriate to say it was cooperation. It was just that the gap between the times that the 4 formations were used that it looked as though it had proceeded at the same time. Controlling 4 formations at the same time, that was Zhuomo's limit. It wasn't multitasking with the mind, but making 4 continuous steps seamlessly. Consciousness splitting was truly multitasking. It could do many things at the same time. If that was true, then other than the consciousness, what also had to split apart was the mind. Zhuomo sunk into thought. The consciousness might be shapeless and intangible, but it was like Ling power, yet it could be separated. The mind was the thoughts of a person, how to split that? That was not possible. Zhuomo understood his own pathway was definitely wrong. He suddenly thought about the Yao seed in his body. The moment the thought appeared in his mind, the scenery around him changed again. The sea of consciousness was quickly pulled closer. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in the sea of consciousness. Pu Yao was nearby. Zhuomo saw Pu Yao suddenly open his eye and scan the surroundings. Then a puzzled expression appeared on his face. Zhuomo didn't have the time to call Pu Yao before his body passed through the flames and was pulled under below the sea of consciousness. And then, he saw the Yao seed. Only now did he know that the Yao seed was actually hidden away in his sea of consciousness, and in the very center at that. Zhuomo suddenly started to admire Pu Yao. To be able to bury an item like this into the deepest part of the sea of consciousness, Pu Yao was quite powerful. He had always assumed that the sea of consciousness was a small island, but now, he found it was actually a sphere. The place he usually went to was the surface of the sphere, and the inside of the sphere was empty. The Yao seed was in the very center, approximately the size of a walnut. Around it, there were many narrow tubes similar to channels or vines. Zhuomo couldn't name them. These slim tubes connected the Yao seed to the surface of the sea of consciousness. The Yao seed had been added later. Then these thin tubes should also have been added later. After he had obtained the Yao seed, his control of the consciousness had grown dramatically. Zhuomo guessed that it was caused by these things. Looking at the Yao seed covered with vine-like tubes, he fell into a daze. His heart suddenly moved. If he copied the structure of the Yao seed, could he stabilize the consciousness, rather than have it move like sand? The more he thought, the more he felt it was possible. Thinking hard about it, he discovered the consciousness, though shapeless and intangible, did not dissipate because of the existence of the sea of consciousness. The Yao seed allowed him to control the consciousness ever more closely to his wishes. Seeing a ray of light, Zhuomo quickly found himself facing another question. Then what could he use in place of the sea of consciousness, and what about the Yao seed? He didn't have Pu Yao's abilities. It was clearly impossible for him to take things in from the outside world. Only things already present could be used here. Looking at the Yao seed in front of him, he couldn't help but think that if this Yao seed was really like a vine, it would be wonderful if it could bear fruit. That way, he wouldn't be lacking for objects to use. This absurd thought just flashed humorously through his mind. He felt that his thinking should have been incorrect, but he needed to find a solution. He started to wander through the sea of consciousness, searching for items that could be the core. It was strange. He could clearly see Pu Yao, but the two of them seemed to be in completely different worlds. No matter how hard he shouted, even passing in front of the other, Pu Yao did not feel it at all. After trying a few times, he gave up on this useless action, and started to search for things that could replace the Yao seed. Yet, after he went through all of the sea of consciousness, he didn't find anything. Was this thinking wrong? He unconsciously floated back into the consciousness, feeling the sense of familiarity pass through the consciousness. He furrowed his brows as he thought. Just at this time, a speck of glittering starlight like silver sand slowly floated past his eyes. His eyes suddenly stopped. That bit of starlight actually had gathered a thin layer of consciousness, as though it had a thin gray shield. Glee suddenly came into Zuomo's eyes. Starlight. Right, how could he have forgotten starlight? He carefully reached out with his hand to grab that speck of starlight. The speck had no weight in his hand, but he could feel even the thin layer of consciousness around the starlight even more clearly. This layer of consciousness was slightly denser than the consciousness of any other place. Ha! This was it. Zuomo decided to call this star dust. Because when he looked at it closely, it wasn't a ball of light, but something tangible, like sand. Having found the miraculous use of stardust, Zuomo started to squat next to the 4 stars to gather stardust. The speed the 4 stars sprayed out stardust was not fast. After a long time, Zuomo only gathered a small handful. He decided to first try using the amount of star dust he had. The stardust was as loose as sand. If he wanted to use them as the inner core, he needed to forge them into one object. Forging was not unfamiliar to Zuomo. Right now, he could be considered half an expert in controlling fire. He quickly became depressed because he could not summon the stalagmite fire. Without fire, wasn't it a dream to forge them together? Fire. His gaze couldn't help but land on the sea of consciousness. That was a large patch of fire. Maybe he could use those crimson fires, Zuomo thought uncertainly. But at this time, he didn't have a better choice, so he could only try. Yet what he didn't expect was, when the thought just appeared, a strand of fire left the sea of flames, and flew in front of him. It was so smooth Zuomo was awestruck. He had never been able to control the flames in the sea of consciousness before. But after thinking for a while, he couldn't think of a cause. In any case, its effectiveness would be known once he tried. Daringly, he took control of this strand of deep crimson fire, and started to forge the stardust in his hands. The deep red flame, carrying a fraction of black, covered the stardust, twisting about like a belly dancer. Chapter 153 Soul-tethered talisman. A bean-sized bead appeared on Zuomo's hand, giving off a soft and warm star-like glow. The bead was spherical, flawlessly spherical, and very light. A thick layer of gray consciousness covered it, which made its glow appear dimmer. Zuomo knew that he was halfway there. In reality, he felt his present situation was extremely weird. Everything in front of him was weird. There were so many wondrous aspects that could not be described, too many things that he could not understand. But so what? He actually hoped that this situation would continue for a bit longer. Please don't be a dream. It was a fleeting thought. He stopped thinking about the weirdness it anymore. This perfect bead that was forged out of stardust, Zuomo called it the star bead. The star bead could automatically attract consciousness, but it still wasn't enough. If the gigantic gray ball that Zuomo was on was his entire consciousness, then the amount of consciousness that the star bead attracted was so little it was insignificant. That little minuscule bit of consciousness lacked real value. Luckily, he could control the consciousness. He started to urge the consciousness to gather at the star bead and condense. No one paid any attention to Zuomo. Even Wuling Sanren had his attention on Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. The battle between the two had reached the decisive moment. Wei Sheng was covered in blood, and there were 3 more sword wounds on Gu Rongping's body. To say nothing of talent, just purely based on pain tolerance, Gu Rongping fell far behind Wei Sheng. Even Gu Rongping had to admit it to himself. What sort of monster was this guy in front of him? No matter what movement he made, it would pull on his wounds. That heart-boring pain almost brought him to tears. Fresh blood continuously flowed out of the wounds. He could clearly feel the power in his body slowly diminish due to blood loss. His head started to ring, his vision gradually became blurry, his Ling power was almost depleted, his channels were wounded. But how come this guy in front of him, who was far more injured than him, still hadn't fallen down? Wei Sheng had many more wounds than him, but why didn't he seem to be affected? Wei Sheng was flooded in blood, so much that he was suspicious that the others had been bleed dry. Why was he still persisting? Wei Sheng's cultivation was much lower than his. It should have long been used up. His channels should have been damaged a long time ago. But why? Looking at the bloody figure in front of him, helplessness and hopelessness suddenly creeped into Gu Rongping's heart. The air around Zhuo Mo's body gradually calmed. The sounds of explosions became rarer, until it reached a complete silence. If one was watching, they would have found that the air around Zhuo Mo's body had went from one extreme to another. There was no longer any explosions, no flow of air, nothing. The area 1 zhang around his body was so silent it seemed to be tangible, with no movement in the air at all. But no one noticed. Wu Ling Sanren and Wei Fei were completely concentrated on the battle between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. The few people that were fighting viciously in the formation also did not detect it. Zhuo Mo was forced to stop. Floating in front of him was a ball of black-gray consciousness the size of a bamboo basket. This was Zhuo Mo's result. After continuously condensing, this consciousness ball had the star bead as the inner core. As expected, the outer layer of consciousness did not dissipate. He had taken out about 1/10 of his consciousness, and condensed it into this basket-sized ball of consciousness. The density of the consciousness ball had reached its limit, and was unable to be compressed any further. Due to the density, it was not like a ball of air, but was rock solid. Naturally, the star ball at the center could not be seen. So was it complete? Zhuo Mo was not certain. He had made the object but he didn't have any idea how to use it. Pu Yao had just described a concept. It was a pity that he was unable to communicate with Pu Yao. He had a strong feeling that if he left this wonderful state right now, it would definitely be hard to ever enter this wondrous state again. How was he to use it? Looking at the black-gray rock ball of consciousness, Zhuo Mo was in a predicament. He could feel that there was a certain connection between himself and the ball of consciousness, as though it was a part of his body. Zhuo Mo's heart moved, and the ball of consciousness suddenly started to circle and dance around him. So interesting. Zhuo Mo instantly became interested. He didn't need to exert any control. Where his thoughts directed, the ball of consciousness would move. It was very fun. Zhuo Mo had never felt so great. Even the little art of cloud and rain, that he was most familiar with, he could not cast and maintain it so effortlessly without thought. The familiarity could not compare to this feeling that the ball was a part of him. He joyfully played around. Anything that he could think of, the ball of consciousness would usually be able to accomplish it. But quickly, he found something worth noting. The air-like consciousness seemed to reject the ball of consciousness. A natural empty space would form around the ball of consciousness. Zhuo Mo couldn't help but frown. The consciousness and the ball of consciousness was from the same origins, why would they repel each other? Pu Yao had never told him that the divided consciousness and the original consciousness would repel each other. Did he do something wrong? Just as he was uncertain of what to do, he suddenly had an extremely daring idea. Why not try and place the ball of consciousness into a talisman? 1. Since the ball of consciousness and his consciousness repelled each other, then he would find the ball of consciousness another place. Additionally, the ball of consciousness felt intimately connected to him, and if it happened to be in a talisman, just think how great it would be. If a talisman could act according to his thoughts, and turn into a part of his body. The more Zhuo Mo thought, the more appealing he found the idea. Because the ball of consciousness was connected to his mind, he was able to understand that the ball of consciousness did not seem to disagree with his idea. So he did it. Zhuo Mo started to calculate which talisman was suitable. Very quickly, he found a suitable talisman, 5-colored pagoda. He didn't have many talismans in the first place and naturally didn't have many to pick from. The inside of the five-colored pagoda was a small pocket space which could take in the ball of consciousness. The five-colored pagoda may be able to deconstruct ordinary materials into the five elemental essences, but consciousness was not one of the five elements. Therefore he did not have to worry about the ball being processed. In his perspective, the five-colored pagoda might only be half completed, but of all the talismans he possessed, it had the greatest potential to grow and the greatest abilities. The moment he finished the thought, the ball of consciousness in front of him disappeared. Immediately after, Zhuo could feel that it was now positioned in an area filled with essence of the five elements. It was inside the five-colored pagoda. Zhuo was gleeful. At the same moment, a blinding five-colored light suddenly lit up the formation. The four people fighting inside the formation, and Chang Heng who had been watching the rings of light, all stopped and raised their heads in shock. A five-colored pagoda appeared above the formation, releasing five colors of light that was both strong and beautiful. It was so eye-catching that the crescent moon above the five-colored pagoda seemed to have lost all color. As the five-colored pagoda rose out of the clouds, light streamed like a sunrise. The exterior of the five-colored pagoda that was covered by the five-colored light had changed greatly. There was a glass-like sheen on the body of the tower, glistening and clear. The colors of each of the five different levels was even more clean and fine. The eaves of the tower curved at a great angle, looking like flying eaves. The body of the tower was narrower and taller than before, the top of the tower seemed sharp. The sudden surge of light alarmed everyone. Soul-tethered talisman. Xian was the first to react. A light suddenly rose in his eyes, his voice full of excitement. The other three dazedly stared at that exquisite five-colored pagoda in the mirage. The light that it produced, every detail, it all displayed just how unordinary it was. After a while, the other three managed to react. Pei Yuanran was the first to turn around his face to look at Xian. It really is a soul-tethered talisman. The disciples behind them stared at each other. They were able to hear the excitement and nervousness in the sect leader's voice. They couldn't help but be curious. What was a soul-tethered talisman? Was it worth Xian Shu and the sect leader to be so excited? Definitely. Xian replied resolutely. An uncontrollable joy floated onto the other three people's face, unable to be disguised. Xian was skilled in forging, and never over-exaggerated. If he was so certain, then it definitely wouldn't be wrong. Soul-tethered talisman. Zhuo actually had a soul-tethered talisman. If Xian was able to realize this, then other people naturally could also see it. Surprise and shock made their way onto many people's faces. A soul-tethered talisman was a talisman that was intimately connected to a shouja. This kind of talisman was extremely rare. The power of a soul-tethered talisman far surpassed normal talismans, and it had many qualities that made people drool. It was able to become stronger as the shouja increased in cultivation. It was connected to the mind of its owner, so they could use it to the greatest effect. The meaning of soul-tethered was akin to being a part of the cultivator, so they did not have to worry about the talisman being stolen by others. Even if a soul-tethered talisman was stolen, the thief would not be able to use it. It was bound to the shouja, that was why it was called a soul-tethered talisman. Who would cut off someone else's hand, and then connect it to their body? A soul-tethered talisman was the highest kind of talisman all cultivators dreamed about. It was strange, but no one was able to forge a soul-tethered talisman. They usually were formed through great treasures which underwent some fortuitous occurrences. Up until now, no one was able to clearly describe the factors for the formation of a soul-tethered talisman. While there were many benefits to the soul-tethered talisman, it wasn't as though there were no disadvantages. Due to the great intimacy between the talisman and the shouja, if the soul-tethered talisman was damaged, the cultivator would also be affected. Usually, soul-tethered talismans were also called life-saving talismans. Those that possessed one used one scarcely and carefully. No one would have thought that a Zhuji would possess a soul-tethered talisman. People envied Zhuo's luck. As the five-colored pagoda transformed and appeared, the completed 72 child formation, sky ring moon chime formation, also changed. The light released by the 5-colored pagoda gradually disappeared. At the same time, the crescent moon in the sky turned to a full moon, becoming even brighter and clean as it hung up in the sky. The full moon was like a wheel, countless moon-colored strands silently drifted down from the full moon. The moon-colored thin strands seemed to flutter in the wind on the other end, quietly moving through the air and passing through the freely swimming rings of light. In the blink of an eye, the light rings of various sizes had been threaded through by the moon-colored strands into bunches similar to wind chimes. The light of the full moon brightened. The thin strands that fell down shook, and all the rings of light shook, countless rings chiming at the same time. Ding! The clear sound traveled through the enormous Great Pine Pavilion, able to be heard at every corner. The sky ring moon chime formation had been reborn. Chapter 154 Moon Chime Soundstorm. Thousands of rings of light were chiming all at once. To the ears of everyone watching it was unspeakably clear and pleasurable, but the expressions of the 5 people inside the formation changed. Even Changheng, who was usually stoic, narrowed his eyes instinctively. He unhesitatingly reached towards the copper ring between his collarbones and took out the bloody spider sword. He glanced at the others in the formation. Everyone acted as though they were facing a great enemy. Even the yellow-faced man that had been steadily overpowering him previously, had a serious expression as he held the copper dagger axe in front of his chest. When that clear chime from the rings of light had sounded out, the Ling power in their bodies shook, their energies became unsteady. Just a chime from the rings of light was so strong. The 5 people instantly became nervous. Even the stupidest person understood now that the great formation in front of them had changed. The full moon shone in the sky. The moon-colored strands were like hair, soft and powerless, weaved in with the rings of light and ringing of wind chimes. The scene was a beautiful painting. Such a beautiful scene, yet there was no admiration from the 5 people inside it. In their eyes, the formation was powerful and full of murderous intent. Behind the black gauze, Sue could not keep her composure, her face full of shock. Such a formation, such a display, was it really something a Zhuji Shouja could complete? That image of a wretched, greedy, and soft rice-eating zombie in her head was completely destroyed. Behind that expressionless face, there seemed to be a long shadow, deep and hard to predict. Had she been wrong in her impression of Zhuo Mo from the beginning? There were thousands rings of light on the moon strings. They slowly swayed, elegant and soft. Tightly focusing on the moon strands and light rings in front of her, Sue's gaze seemed to be deeply attracted to them, and she was unable to move her eyes away. The rings of light gently trembled, and little slivers of killing intent slowly permeated, silently taking over every bit of space. Her mouth was slightly dry. She had always wondered why Zhuo Mo hadn't sent out the paper crane. She understood now. Zhuo Mo didn't need her help at all. But at this time, her body was tense, not daring to slack off the tiniest bit. Her gaze still didn't move. The sword scripture that she practiced belonged to the area of magnetism. Magnetic power was extremely good for detection. These tiny bits of killing intent appeared as non-threatening, but in reality, they could gather together at any time and kill. Yet what truly made her on her guard, and more nervous than ever, was that she was their target. Why? Why would she also be an enemy? Sue couldn't understand, but there was no time for her to think. She could only prepare for battle. She had a strong feeling that once the big formation was activated, it wouldn't be so relaxing. Wu Ling Sanren and Wei Fei's expressions were heavy. Wei Fei stared down and asked solemnly, "Sanren, do you recognize this formation?" Wu Ling Sanren shook his head. "No, but this formation should be 4th grade. However, it must be that soul-tethered talismans that he just got which makes it so powerful." He nervously stared at the formation below him, eyes unwavering. He had to admit he had made a wrong judgment. Before, he had only felt Zuemo had some talent, but his skill with formations was in the range of normality, but looking at it now, the formation that guy had set up was far beyond his cultivation stage. If it was only that, he would have just been slightly surprised. What really shocked him was that this guy had a soul-tethered talisman. Truly a fortunate guy. He couldn't help but be envious. His cultivation was multiple times higher than Zuemo, but he didn't have a soul-tethered talisman. He was not the only one that was green-eyed over Zuemo's soul-tethered talisman. Wei Fei also sighed over the unfairness of the heavens. However, they knew that soul-tethered talismans could not be planned for. Both were also Jindan experts, the strength of their mind extremely resolute, and did not move so easily for an outside object. The two of them quickly returned to normal. What does he want to do? Wei Fei's brows furrowed as he snorted coldly. Does he want to fight 1 against 5? Has a soul-tethered talisman, so he doesn't even know where his limits are. Wu Ling Sanren didn't speak. After continuously making mistaken judgments, he felt the less he said, the better. Also, based on the grave presence of the formation below, Zuemo may not be brash. What he really could not see clearly was Zuemo's present situation. Inside the formation, Zuemo still maintained his weird posture, his eyes empty. The air around him seemed to be like glue, motionless. If one looked closely, they would find that the rings of light near him were affected by an invisible force that pushed them away. The abnormalities had started when Zuemo had entered this strange state. Wu Ling Sanren didn't have any confidence. The 5-colored pagoda floated in the sky above the pond. On the sword-sharp point, there was a dot of starlight that flashed, communicating with the full moon in the sky. The moon dimmed and brightened. Clink 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 clink. Suddenly, the light rings on the moon's strings started to shake. The small chimes were like a tide, spreading out in waves. The 5 people inside the formation stiffened as the tension rose. At this time, they did not have the attention to spare to fight with other people because, to their shock, they discovered that Zuemo did not plan on letting even one of them escape from the formation escape. TSK. Unlucky. Luoli felt helpless. Zuemo went crazy again. The flying sword floated beside him, waiting to attack. He said those words, but light came into his eyes, and slight anticipation rose. There was quite a period of time since the last time they had fought. He always had the thought of trying to fight Zuemo again, but he had never found the chance. Now that the opportunity was right in front of him, the desire for battle burned in his heart. In Luo Li's mind, Zuemo and Wei Xing were all geniuses of the sect. Wei Xing Shixiang was like a mountain peak unable to be scaled. Facing Shixiang, one would only feel hopelessness. Zuemo was completely different. If one saw him usually, one would always accidentally underestimate and disdain him. But when one truly faced him, he might not win, but he definitely would surprise and shock others. Gue Feng also detected the thick killing intent in the formation. He didn't use the ghost movement to hide his figure like usual. The entire formation was under the control of the other. The effect of the ghost movement was limited. His expression was grave. 2 blooms of bright green ghost fire burned on the white bone sword. The body of the sword hummed like the soft sobs of souls. Zuemo still hadn't left that wondrous state. This state made people intoxicated, a state where anything was possible, as though everything was understood. He silently stood there as though he was a spectator, watching everything that was happening in front of him. The 5-colored pagoda whose thoughts were connected to his was stand guard in the center of the great formation, controlling the entire Skyring moon chime formation. Every detail of the Skyring moon chime formation flowed across his heart. He couldn't see it, but he could clearly feel it. It was passed on from the 5-colored pagoda. Before, his original intentions had been to activate and use the 72-child formation Skyring moon chime formation in order to gain some experience, and to comprehend some of the intricacies of the Skyring moon chime formation. Right now, every detail of the Skyring moon chime formation was in front of him. Due to this, he decided he would try the power of the sky ring moon chime formation. His thoughts moved, and the 5-colored pagoda activated the great formation. The fine chimes that had like a tide suddenly disappeared. The enormous formation suddenly sank into a dead silence, suffocating like a rock pressed to the chest. The 5 people tensed to their limits inside the formation. This suffocating and heavy silence was the prelude to the killing. The round moon suddenly lit up, emanating the brightest and strongest light it could without any regard. In the blink of an eye, the round moon which had been as clean as jade seemed to have started to burn, the strong light making it appear like a ball of fire. Clink! A ring of light that was the closest to the full moon gave a clear sound. This clear sound announced the beginning of the killing move. There seemed to be some force that was being passed down through the moon string. Like it was a relay, one by one, the rings of light sounded. Clink, clink, clink. The sounds went from slow to fast, the frequent chimes like a suddenly rising tide. Looking from the sky, the rings of light hanging off the strands coming of the moon were like dominoes being set off, one shaking after the previous. The shaking of the first ring of light was the least, and the sound was the lightest. The second ring of light vibrated more, and the sound was slightly louder. The third ring of light vibrated even greater in magnitude, the sound even louder. This cascade of changes was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the power seemed to have passed to the end of the moon string, and to the last ring of light. The last ring of light on each moon strand lit up at the same time. After the power from the preceding rings of light finally reached the last ring of light, the chiming of the ring of light had reached a maximum. Clang! The 5 people inside the formation felt their vision blur. Everything they saw seemed to twist and change. The ground underneath their feet shook violently, almost knocking them off their feet. All of their expressions changed. Sue's Black Day's sword was held across her chest, her right hand holding the hilt of the sword, her left hand straight like a sword, pressing gently on the body of the sword. She shouted clearly, "Protect!" With her as the center, a terrifying magnetic force exploded into the surroundings. Luoli didn't go grab the flying sword floating in front of him, but spread out his right hand, the palm open. His voice was ethereal, lonely and empty, self-separate. The ethereal sword essence was like a female ghost dancing by his side. Chang Heng's blood spider sword transformed into the blood spider, shielding him from the front. The blood light on the body of the blood spider was extremely bright, as though it had just been taken out of a blood pond. The blood spider gave a vicious howl, ready to leap. At some time, a heavy copper armor appeared on the yellow-faced man. The thick armor covered his entire body, only revealing his eyes. His hand was holding the copper dagger axe flatly, his back straight as he bellowed, "Break!" A child appearing about 6 or 7 years old appeared in front of Gui Feng. He was very chubby, his skin tender. He was wearing a red belly cloth. However, his eyes were an eerie green. Gui Feng shouted, "Go!" Gui Feng's killing move, Little Ghost King. The 5 people simultaneously used their killing moves. They could feel a strong threat. The activation of the Skyring moon chime formation did not have any forewarning. Once it started, it activated its strongest attack. Inside the formation, the lion-headed copper cauldrons that Zhua Mo used to set up the leaf fire formation collapsed into dust, the metal nails turned to dust, the jade cards turned to dust, the plants turned to dust, the ground turned to dust. The half-moose-sized pond turned into a ball of fine mist. This was the initiation of the strongest killing move of the 72-child formation Skyring moon chime formation, Moon Chime Sound Storm. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.